right, good afternoon, everybody. We're gonna hop on the record here real quick. The Mason County Commission has to take one, do a quick item before we move into the thing that you're all here to do with the jail kickoff. Before we get started, though, we do have to get everybody on the record, and so we'll just start with quick introductions. We'll start here at my left and then work our way around the room.
Sharon Trask. Vicki Rains, Grace Harbor County.
Randy Ross, Grace Harbor County.
Wes Cormier, Grace Harbor County.
Travis Adams, Mason County.
Casey Salisbury, Mason County.
Kelly Fraser, Mason County.
Mark Cox, Grace Harbor County.
Bill Valdez with K&B Architects.
Ryan Sperling, Mason County.
Kevin Hansen, Mason County.
Jeff Feeney with KMB.
Peter Jones, Mason County.
Brad Johansson, Grace Harbor.
Dennis Lesby, Grace Harbor.
Travis Davis, Grace Harbor.
Shane Schoenberg, Mason County.
Brenda Sherman, Grace Harbor County.
Jeff Knighton, City of Shelton.
Darren Moody, City of Shelton.
Mike Dorsey, Mason County.
Tim Whitehead, Mason County.
Patsy Robinson, Mason County.
George Steele, Mason County District Court.
Dan Goodell, Mason County Superior Court Judge.
Amelia Cristobacca, K&B Architects.
Jason Berry, K&B Architects.
And Mark Peterbolt, KMB.
Very good. Well, welcome everybody. So, as many of you in the room know, this weekend is Mason County's Oyster.
Randy.
Oh, I thought you went already. Sorry.
And Randy
And Randy Netherland. How could we forget Randy? As everybody may know, this weekend is Oyster Fest. We found out that there was a correction that needed to be made to one of the special occasion liquor licenses, and so the county has to issue a correction to the letter of no objection that we had already taken care of but are redoing. And so there's a letter here for me to the State Liquor Control Board that is being asked to be signed, and if there's no objection from the commission, I'll sign that on the county's behalf.
Yeah, I have no objection. I hope you'll go ahead and sign it so we can get that moved forward.
That's good with me.
Okay, very good. Okay, and then with that, we'll turn it over for our presentation with KMB. Welcome all of you here. Thank you.
You bet. So we'll kind of go around a little bit and kind of introduce ourselves a little bit more and kind of our roles. So hopefully if you're here, this is for the Mason and Grace Harbor County Jail Needs Assessment project. So hopefully you're in the right room and here for the right reason. I am Bill Valdez. I'm a partner with K&B Architects. I'm a justice expert and planner, and I'll be acting as the project manager for the design team for this project. Mark?
I'm Mark Beautiful, principal with KMB, and I'm here to assist Bill and provide overall quality assurance.
I'm Jason Berry with K&B Architects. I'm the healthcare specialist. I do both inpatient, outpatient, and also mental institutions as well.
And I'm Amelia Cristobacca. My focus is on reentry and restorative justice models, but I'm also an architectural designer.
And so this is kind of just the start of so we have in the crowd, Mr. Jeff Feeney.
I'm not the only one. My name is Jeff Feeney, and my role is somewhat undefined at this point, but I think what I bring into this team is I've been working with Mason County and Shelton since 2015 on projects from Great View School District all the way down through Shelton and out to Merriam Knight. I've worked with people at the city, the county, fire marshal, everything, and so hopefully I can bring some expertise in what we've learned, what we've shared, and how we can make this team better, and how we work with each one of you in your roles with the cities and the counties.
And actually, that's a great segue. Jeff is definitely kind of really underselling his role with regard to the project. A big aspect of what he does is for public initiative, bond planning, and those type of things. And a big part of this project, when we end up getting to it later in this process, is really going to be working with deciding, once we understand the size and the needs that the project actually has, what the budgetary expectation is going to be, but also having discussions about how is this project going to actually be presented out to the community and how is it going to be funded. What Jeff actually has is a lot of expertise in working with public entities on coming up with public funding solutions. We also have, as part of our team, PFIC, who's another specialty consulting firm that works with public agencies for privatized financing solutions. So we're able to have the public financing and private financing solutions all brought up and brought to bear to try to figure out what's the best funding solution for these projects moving forward. In addition to this team, we also have John Bales with JMB Cost Consulting, who will be providing all of our cost modeling for the different outcomes once we actually understand the size and locations of the projects. We also have KPFF, which is a engineering firm who specializes in civil engineering, will be helping us doing site evaluations and site considerations for siting of the facilities. And then we also have, and unfortunately she was not able to be here today, is Karen Chin with Chin Planning Group. So Karen is a national expert in justice facility design. So she's been involved with planning facilities all across the country with regards to both law enforcement, corrections, and judicial programs. She is going to be really leading the first series of meetings that will be occurring over the next couple of months of really working with all the different stakeholders here with trying to define exactly what and understanding what the entire justice system is in each one of the counties. How can it be more streamlined? How can it be improved? What systems are currently in place? Are they fully being leveraged? Are there others that can actually be incorporated for alternatives or for reentry? And through that whole process, really better understanding exactly what the current needs actually are of your facilities. Because as all you are aware that your facilities have been pretty much at capacity for quite some time. So we need to really understand exactly what the current actually needs are, see if there's any other alternatives that can be implemented to actually change that forecast, and then be able to then have a good understanding of our benchmark and our starting point to be able to forecast out over the next 20, 25 years of growth and transition to see what the needs of these facilities actually are. So that's pretty much in a nutshell the team that you're going to be seeing. What we wanted to be able to do at this meeting is kind of act as a kickoff, really walk through kind of the big picture of what we're going to be doing, kind of go through some of these next steps and these coming meetings and the outcomes of those, be able to talk about really what the full schedule of the project is going to be and the timelines and the commitment of all of you, knowing that this is not going to be your main job to be participating and assisting us with this needs assessment. And so we want to make sure that we set those expectations of what we need from you from a participation and what you'll expect to be able to receive from all of us. As well as then we'll end up going through, and that's what some of these boards are actually for. We want to go through a goal setting and a visioning process. So we understand really what that hierarchy of goals and expectations for these projects are going to be between both of the counties and all the different stakeholders. So we're going to want to go through that process later in this meeting as well. So that being said, we pretty much, we have the agenda over there, so if you just need to reference that, that's where that's going to be at. So we've pretty much gone through kind of introduction of roles and our introductions. We actually had a pre-kickoff meeting with Mark Cox and Frank Pinter kind of to work through what these agendas are actually going to be. They're both going to be acting as the project managers for their respective counties. And so as far as communication goes, what we talked about is all that information is going to flow through them. And for the design team, it's all going to flow through me. So that allows us to make sure that we're able to manage and understand all the information that's going back and forth on these projects. So if you have questions, if you have needs, or anything else, please reach out to those two gentlemen from a project management standpoint. They'll make sure that it all gets to me. And then as we have information and documentation and needs we're going to be communicating to them, and then they're going to distribute out to all the participating stakeholder groups. So as far as that communication goes, we really need to make sure that we are all on the same page there, so information doesn't get lost, and also so we're not receiving direction that isn't kind of approved and understood by the individual counties. So I just want to make sure that that is really well understood, that we want to make sure we do follow those lines of communication. And then we also want to talk a little bit about decision making and how that process is necessarily going to go, and that's something that we need to kind of talk a little bit more about. There's obviously some decisions that are going to be reserved for the Board of County Commissioners of the two counties to be able to make a decision on, and other decisions are going to probably be made at either the steering committee or executive committee or at the stakeholder level. And that's one thing that we need to really understand of what things are going to be at each one of those levels. Typically what we kind of expect to be able to see, besides just the typical briefings that go up to the commissioner level, anything with regard to cost and cost expectation and overall budget and overall size of projects, that ends up being a decision that's going to be at the county commissioner level. And it sounds like it kind of looks from some of the reaction that that's probably the direction that we're going to go. In the schedule, which we will, when we get to that, I'll hand that out. We haven't put in exactly when those briefings are going to be, but we had conversations between Frank and Mark and myself of targeting several different locations to be able to have those interactions for briefings at kind of critical times throughout this process, to be able to get the commissioners up to speed and for them to be able to have action on them if need be for some of those decision-making processes. So some of that has been done.
Oh, is that what it is?
So we do. So speaking of sustainability, obviously we do have some.
Do we have to pay more for the show? Yeah, all right.
And yes, just the regular tape, so better than the.
That's the problem with sustainability.
Sustainability, then we do have actually licensors, so that's kind of a good thing to see. So that's something that we do need to kind of understand as far as decision making, how that process is going to work within each of the counties, and each of the counties might actually be unique to themselves. Have you had any kind of conversations with stakeholder groups or the Board of County Commissioners to see exactly how decision making is actually going to occur on the project?
Not yet.
Yeah, we haven't gone down that
Okay.
road.
So that's something, again, to kind of put on the homework assignment over the course of the next several weeks to kind of talk through what elements need to get raised up to the Board of County Commissioners, what are going to be more at maybe an executive group level, and what decision-making processes are actually going to be at a stakeholder group level. So we'll want to be able to go through that. Then another aspect that we kind of had talked about a little bit was stakeholders. So reached out to Mark and Frank and went through to try to get an understanding of who are all the participants and who are going to be the different stakeholders that are going to be participating in the study. So as you can kind of see, this is very, very large, because again, we were looking at globally, system-wide, really how is the system operating and how is it informing each other to ultimately lead to what is the actual needs of jail beds and jail operations within the facility. So the direction that we were kind of given is that both of the groups, both of the counties do have an executive committee that's been currently in place and with discussing jail needs. And so this is kind of how we understand that executive committee, which includes the Board of County Commissioners, the project managers, which would be Mark and Frank, the budget director, the sheriff or under sheriff at Grays Harbor, and the sheriff and under sheriff for Mason County, jail superintendents or jail lieutenants from an operational standpoint for the jail, as well as Superior Court judge for Grays Harbor, and then the way that we understand it, that Mason County also has a criminal justice team that's been in place. And these are the participants that are part of the criminal justice. So is this kind of a correct, for our interpretation and understanding of kind of an executive team or group that's been involved with evaluating the needs of the jail and the justice system? Okay, see no objections to that. Then also, this is how we've kind of looked at the different aspects of the study. These are the other participants that we're going to be interacting with, both from the system-wide evaluation as well as the programming components that will be occurring more like in the January, February timeframe. Is that within the sheriff's office and the jail operations, we're going to need to talk with participants within jail administration, for jail operations, jail programs and outreach and alternatives, food service and laundry, transport, so how are inmates being moved between the courts and the jail and to other law enforcement agencies, as well as we'll have some discussions with this project if there's not two independent facilities that are developed but a regional facility, how's that transportation actually going to occur between law enforcement and the districts and superior courts to this more centralized or regionalized jail facility. So that's going to be really critical to really understand from an operational standpoint, but also on a project siting standpoint. We'll also be talking with probation, Superior and District Court, law enforcement agencies. Again, this is really informed on the booking center within the jail, as well as system-wide, needing to really understand how that can be possibly affected, or how the existing set cap within the jail has actually already informed law enforcement within your communities. Prosecuting attorney and public defenders, possibly the Bar Association with how they would actually interact with the jail system, as well as always wanting to talk with county facilities and maintenance to make sure as we start setting expectations for what the facility would actually be, that's easy to maintain, that's meeting all your building operations performance and the level of quality of the different systems, that all gets incorporated into the budget appropriately. So these are all the different agencies and organizations that we feel that we're going to need to be able to have interaction with. But what I'd like to kind of hear, is there anyone else or any other agencies that we kind of indicated that aren't up here that we should incorporate? Yes.
Could affect our clerk's offices also, because if any type of court session is held at the facility, they will have to provide
Can you give me,
service.
Amelia, like one of the big markers that are in there so I can write that up?
So that's
That's
the only
great.
gap I see right now.
That'd be wonderful.
Here, I'll give that.
Okay. So that'd be great. And so this is also something that we are going to kind of indicate in these upcoming meetings, the different groups that we're going to, go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, I would just say, it might be helpful to think about even including some of our behavioral health folks
Right.
that do crisis response, locally.
And actually, that was, I think, on one of the lists of homework. We kind of did indicate on here. If it's not on here, that is definitely it, because obviously the behavioral health is a huge issue within jails, and we need to be able to understand what those services are within the community, as well as how they are going to interact and provide programming within the jail system. So definitely we'll add that.
It's down there, Bill, under jail data on the page closest to you, about the fourth line, fifth line down. Talks about the treatment plans for mental health.
Yeah, I knew that we had kind of, and who the specialists are and who are providing the services within the community. That's great for us to be able to talk. Yes.
For Mason County, we have two tribes here, both of which have
Right.
law enforcement agencies, and we would probably want to have them at least consulted and involved.
Right.
Same
And actually, that's kind of a great segue.
Same
That's
with Grace
another
Harbor.
reason why Mark
Grace
is
Harbor,
here.
too.
Mark has been involved in a lot of our tribal work that we've done in our firm's history, and is planning on being highly involved in that type of interaction, knowing that the tribal participation or contracting might actually occur within the jail facilities, and needing to really understand what those needs actually are
One of
and
the,
be conscious about.
yeah, one of the facility tours on the agenda up there is going to be the tribal facility that we
Nisqually.
did for Nisqually, and I think you guys are probably familiar with that. And we'll get to talk a lot about the programming exercise that we went through. Yeah, we need more tape, Amelia. But the programming that we did for the tribe, the focus was on restorative justice on that project, and so we did a lot of work with their courts folks about what they needed and what their jail management needed in terms of physical space to accommodate. Whoa.
Safety violation.
Yeah.
It's not the safest thing.
Yeah, we got this.
Where's OSHA?
We have insurance.
So as Bill said, yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of parallels out there that we can use, and the focus, of course, of this effort is building that program. And a big part of that is going to be on, not only the diversionary programs, but also the behavioral health, accommodating that component. And so what can we do, and what kind of space do we need to accommodate those programs is going to be a big part of that. And we'll get an opportunity for those of you that do go on the tours to look at some of that work that we've done in the past.
One more item, and that just sort of ancillary to jail operations, and that's getting our IT or central service departments together and keeping them involved in the conversation, because it has to do with which software you end up with and what the hardware needs to run that software is. Again, I don't know if it's initial planning, but it's down in there somewhere.
And I think that this applies to both counties, right? I mean, I don't need to write it twice. You guys understand this. Go ahead.
I know for Mason County, our inmates have access to justice through the Law Library Committee. That's how they receive all of their access to Westlaw and that sort of thing. So obviously, if that's going to continue, there's going to need to be a discussion there.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? We don't want to leave anybody out. Okay.
What about outside resources for mental health programs and education?
Yeah, I think that's what we're kind of,
Yeah, I think
they
that
put up there.
Yeah.
It's going to be more of those, both internal as well as external capabilities. Okay. If there's nothing else on there, the next item that we had is actually project schedule. Amelia, if you wouldn't mind kind of handing around those project schedules. We thought, rather than putting these up on big boards, people are probably going to want, can I have one of them so I can... So we want to be able to have this to be able to keep in kind of look. So this is the preliminary schedule that we kind of developed. What we're indicating here that we've already kind of coordinated and kind of worked this out with Mark and Frank. But essentially, this is kind of a graphic schedule, kind of showing the overall project duration that we're kind of talking about. What we also had talked about was, in general, when do we have to be able to make some decision points with regard to the project. So essentially, that's what this kind of next little section right down here is looking at these project meetings, which are here in the blue on this third line across, and indicating really what we're probably going about this time that we're going to end up needing to be able to make some decisions on them. So essentially what we're looking at is probably in mid-December, as part of those meetings, that's where we're going to need to be able to make a decision on whether we're kind of accepting the methodology for population projections and growth and trends for pretty much establishing those future horizons for 5, 10, 15, 20 years out for each of the counties. So we're going to have some approval of the methodology that we're looking for those trend lines. Those we will be looking at past historical data, as well as forecasting out some additional trend lines. We're going to have probably some high, medium, and low trends and projections. And so we'll just need, by that point in time, a decision of saying, yeah, we're comfortable with using the mid trend line for this one, or an averaging in here. So that's what we'll be needing a decision on at that point. In January, as part of our second round of justice systems evaluations, and prior to and at the very start of programming, we're going to need to really understand how you want us to evaluate jail operations model. So we'll have some conversations about really what that means. We're going to, as part of our facilities tours, we're actually going to be touring 3 very, very different facilities. So at that point, we're going to really be wanting to know, are we wanting to do a direct supervision model, an indirect supervision model, a blended model, or how that direction should be, or is hoping to be able to go. We're also going to be having some conversations about really what the goal is going to be at. Is it going to be a little bit more heavy on a dormitory configuration, mini dorms, hard cells, those type of things, because that will end up driving the program and the square footage requirements for those decisions. So we're going to have some direction by then, just so as we move forward, we're not taking steps back. The next one was really as the programming is getting really finalized, and we're going to start doing some project concept designs and site tests. We need to have some information by that time, which is going to be in early February, on where these projects may be located, both if it's and again, to kind of get back to it, essentially what we've been asked to do is do 3 separate studies. One for Grays Harbor, for doing their own facility, independent, somewhere within the county. One for Mason County, the same, where they'd be independent, somewhere within the county. And then a third option or study is where your resources are pooled together into a regional jail, locate somewhere within both of the counties. So at that point in time, we're going to have some direction for each of those alternatives. Whether are we looking at theoretical sites, are we looking at evaluating existing sites, are we looking at other land that the counties currently own, or exactly what is that going to be? We've already had some preliminary discussions of really what the site requirements probably need to be for those facilities. We'll be able to update that and have those conversations with Frank and Mark as we get further into the programming, and once we actually know what the facility sizes are actually going to be, we can more inform of saying, really, to be able to do these facilities, you're going to need X number of acreage for each of these different scenarios, and that would be buildable acreage. So at least we can then start evaluating whether certain sites are going to be able to work or be able to function for these type of facilities, or if other sites might not be able to work because they're not too big or they don't have appropriate access, or those type of things. So that's where we'll be starting to make those decisions on site as we kind of start, or as we're wrapping up programming and really starting kind of concept design and site test fits. Then item E, which is in March, is where we're going to having to make some decisions with regard to preferred planning solutions. So this is where we're going to be, we're going to have several different concepts for plans, for sites, site locations, how they actually function, how they're all laying out. we would like to be able to start narrowing those down to more specific preferred options for us to start evaluating cost and cost models. So at that point in time is really where we're going to really be probably interacting quite a bit with each one of the Board of County Commissioners to provide direction on, yeah, we prefer kind of this solution on these sites, and that's where we really want the cost modeling to be performed.
What was D?
And then D was just another a meeting. We really don't have any standing requirements for decision making at that meeting, but we will. We might again. These might shift around depending on how the discussions in the planning process ends up going. But D, currently at that meeting, we don't have any planned decision making functions that have to occur at that. F, which would be late March into early April, is really where we're going to have discussions about funding amounts. So by then we've gone through a couple of different meetings for cost modeling and budgetary analysis. And at that point, we're going to need to be able to say, yeah, okay, we know how big it's going to be. We know roughly what the sites it's going to be located at, roughly the plan configuration, and we know these budgetary options. We're going to have to kind of have, at that point in time, direction of saying this is our preferred direction with regard to establishing budget. Because the next round of meetings is really going to start talking about what I indicated that Jeff's going to be part of, and PFIC is discussing, okay, what does that mean from a funding solution? And really looking at all the different options and permutations for funding these facilities. And so we need to be able to know, are we talking about X dollar amount or Y dollar amount, because they might have totally different funding solutions that go along with it, depending on for each of the counties. So that's going to be really that description is going to be near the end of April is when that the final decision on the funding model will be near the end of April, prior to us starting to really finalize draft of the report and then finalizing a final document, which would be in early June. So that's kind of the decision-making process that we're going to be going, and the series of kind of groups and functions and meetings that we're going to have. The final kind of section of that is indicating the planned meetings that we currently have for each of these and the time frames of those. As you can see, some of these early meetings are indicated to be multi-day, and they are going to be fairly long, fairly intensive meetings. So, because essentially, like I said, we're going to have to be doing 3 studies all as part of this one study. So some of the meetings and the conversations that we're going to want to have independently with Mason County and with Grace Harbor County. And then some meetings we're going to have all participants at for a shared regional facility. And so we're trying to kind of group those decisions and those meetings together. The direction that we've had is that it's best for the elected officials to be able to meet on Wednesdays. So what we might end up doing is having stakeholder meetings and different participant conversations on like a Tuesday with one county, with more of the electeds of both of the counties, if need be, on a Wednesday, and then meetings with the other county with stakeholder groups or similar type of discussions on like a Thursday, something along those lines. So that's how we've tried to kind of structure and organize these different meetings. As we kind of go over the next over this next month, we'll be really refining some of these, working with Mark and Frank, and really saying on each one of these days, we actually want to be able to meet with jail administration with Grace Harbor County at 1 o'clock on this day, and we'll be then meeting with probation at 4 o'clock, and literally start slotting those dates for those meetings as soon as we can. But that's going to take a lot of coordination based off of the different stakeholder groups' availabilities, as well as really what works best for each of those. So we're going to be as flexible as we can and work around your schedules. Like I said, this is in addition to your everyday jobs, and so we're going to do everything that we can to not be a burden on each of you to be able to kind of gain that information.
Well,
Yeah.
just a little bit of input. You know, as your consultant architects, we're well versed at putting together an architectural program meeting space requirements for a project, right? So when we look at this project, and this is kind of a question, I think, for you, Bill, maybe for the group, but when you build an architectural program separate for Mason County, and you do the same thing for Grace Harbor to meet what their needs are for their own facility, and then you bring that together into this shared facility. It gets really exciting about what can be shared and what can't be shared and who makes those decisions, right?
Mhm.
And we've had experience doing this in the past. And so that would be one area that I would really want to look at is that we're pretty good at building those programs, those space lists and those architectural programs. But then as your consultant, we need a lot of help when it comes to actually talking about, okay, now we see what those needs are individually, but then bringing it together, where can we find those efficiencies and where can that be done? And there's a lot, because it's a fairly comprehensive, complicated program. But when we look at things like food service, and we look at things like laundry and those types of things, I think we can all agree that, you know, those are areas where, of course, you're going to be able to come together and say, we don't need two separate laundries. We don't need two separate maintenance and operations areas within. But it gets more complex, of course, as you get into the actual programs, whether it be the court functions or whether it be the those things that the counties, of course, have been since the beginning of time doing themselves, right? So how do you bring that together? So I don't know where that fits into the work plan, but from experience doing this, where you're bringing two entities together, therein lies the challenge in terms of working together and coming up with solutions. Because, you know, walking into this thing, the efficiency of bringing the two counties together for a shared facility, in order to make that a successful venture, that's obviously what we're going to be looking for. Where are those efficiencies? How can this project or this vision work? And maybe we find, and that's part of the process here, that isn't the answer. But we're surely going to find that out as we go through the process. And so that whole idea of communication, decision-making, stakeholders, you know, in this kickoff meeting, I'm really glad to see there's so many people here. I didn't think we would have that. Matter of fact, when we made copies of that little draft work plan. So it's obviously going to be, there's a lot of interest, which is great. And I just want to see how maybe we modify that work plan to allow that kind of discussion, the time that's needed, with the right people, and, you know, however many meetings it takes in order to get to that point. Because when you do a study like this, I think it's all about, you know, at its core, it's really the analysis of alternatives, right? What is the best path forward? And that's what we're trying to get to. It's a little complex because of the nature of the program and all of the entities that are involved. And that's why, as you're to do the best job that we can for you in terms of building that program, we actually have to know how you do business, and not just sort of on the surface, but detailed. And that's why Bill is prepared to come in and with the rest of our team, and Karen, I wish Karen was available today, because she would it takes you about 10 minutes to figure out how much she knows in terms of this business. So anyway,
I think that's a very great points, Mark, and that it's going to be very exciting because literally, each county might make a decision on how they're going to provide food service or alternatives or jail operations independent for their two facilities, but when they go to shared, that decision and that outcome might be totally different. And so I think that's what is going to be really exciting as part of some of these conversations that come out of it, is really how that changes when the facility starts to become a joint regional facility between the two counties.
And Bill mentioned our cost consultant, JMB, who we've worked with for many years. And as we build the program for the shared facility, at least initially, you would think that through those efficiencies, you're going to see some advantage, some cost advantage to that. And of course, the commissioners are going to be obviously very interested in that. Is what does that mean? The efficiencies that come from a shared facility, how does that translate into some cost savings? You've got one site, not two sites. You've got all these shared functions within the facility, not duplications of those functions. And so if we build that program and have the right inputs from all of the right stakeholders, hopefully we can show the advantage of a regional or a shared type of facility.
Yeah. So then kind of getting down to the individual meetings, these dates have been, like I said, preliminary kind of approved. And the meeting dates and schedules have been distributed out to Mark and Frank. And essentially what we wanted to kind of illustrate here is what are the subject matter, what's the decision or discussions that are going to be happening at each one of these meetings. Obviously today, October the 2nd, we're doing a kickoff meeting. Our next really interaction is currently scheduled for October the 16th, which is actually facilities tours. So this is really going to start those ideas and opportunities kind of flowing. What we've made is arrangements to go in 2 or 3 different facilities. One would be Nisqually, which is a tribal facility that's campus designed. It's primarily dormitory driven, but it's also of a size and a scale that's fairly similar to a jail bed needs that each of your facilities would possibly need as independent counties.
And it was also designed to be a regional facility.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the Nisquallies have their name on it, it was meant to accommodate multiple tribal agencies. And so there's some similarities there from the regional aspect, and there's some similarities there just from the alternatives to incarceration and restorative justice and the things that we'll have Amelia address for this particular project.
You bet.
Okay.
A second project is up in King County, which is more focused on cell beds configuration, a direct supervision model, and very small scale of day rooms and units to kind of give a different perspective as far as that goes. It's also a fairly normative environment, which is really kind of some of the best practices and implements a lot of the best practices that you see in jail design today. And then the third is a recently opened jail facility from just a couple of years ago. And the one up in King County is literally just coming online here in the last month. The one up in Skagit County came online a couple of years ago. It's a 400-bed jail facility in Mount Vernon. It has a mixture of about 75% celled configuration in both single, double, and quad cells, as well as about 25% in dormitories focused on inmate worker and work release programs for both male and female populations. And those units there are a little bit larger compared to the one in King County. So it gives you a wide range of newer justice facilities to kind of start doing a comparison and seeing how these best practices are starting to get applied to these type of facilities. They're fairly wide ranging. So that's a good way
And
to
also,
start being
and also look at, where they fell short, right?
Yeah, and having
So,
those conversations.
way short on secure mental health beds, everybody needs more, or, didn't really predict population needs for numbers of beds for women. Or too many of a particular type of bed type that can't really be used effectively. Too many open dorm beds and not enough individual secure, beds, because you've got some off on your programming for security classification. And so even though these are new facilities, you can see, ask the hard questions too about where they might have fallen short. And so that we, again, can take that information and use it in the programming that we're doing for Grace Harbor and Mason counties to align what we think would be the most appropriate best. And I also just want to point out, Bill talking about involving, law enforcement, jail management, and those folks to get them involved in that conversation in terms of how the jail needs to be managed, and the concepts for management moving forward, and what we've learned in the past. And because for those of you that aren't close to the details of this type of a facility design, all of those decisions have an impact on the daily lives and operation and management of the staff that run them, but they also have large cost impacts, right? So when you tour the different facilities, and I like the ones that you picked for the tour, because what you'll find is the facilities that focused on open dormitories and that type of thing, that the cost comes way down in a lot of cases. And so there's
Or
a
the
lot.
capital costs might go down, but the operational costs might go up. And so that's really where
That's true.
those discussions need to be had. As part of these studies will be an operational and staffing plan analysis and study that will be part of this report as well.
Right, and another thing to be said there too, and this is just to be respectful of everybody, and that is that hopefully we're making decisions on that, not based on a particular style or personality of an individual, but based on the best available information and data that we have available to us in the industry. And I think that we can bring some of that. Obviously, that's why you guys have selected us as your consultant, is to bring some of that expertise to the table that hopefully is unbiased and doesn't sort of just looks at it from the standpoint of what are your needs, what are those demographics, what are the population data that we collect, and then how does that get interpreted into the program, right? And so anyway, I just look forward to working with Bill on that part of it.
So as far as the facilities tours, Frank and Mark, have those invites been kind of sent out to all the different stakeholders? And okay, so we should be able to, in the coming week or two, be able to get a good head count of who will be able to attend on those.
I've got a list for you for today.
That'd be great. Are some of the county commissioners planning on attending those tours? Excellent. That'd be great. I think it'll be very insightful and definitely beneficial, I think, for all of you to be able to kind of go and see some of those facilities. So then the next meetings following that is really where we start really getting into the meat of the project, and in November, what's currently slated for the 12th, 13th, and the 14th. And that's when Karen Chin is going to be working with and kind of meeting with each one of all these different stakeholders. So we actually provide a list of all the different participants that we're going to want to be able to meet with, and that's where we're going to want to be able to meet with the counties independently as well as together over the course of those 3 days, and really starting to really understand system-wide what the lay of the criminal justice system and what is being implemented, and start getting an understanding of what other things might we be able to do to either bring down jail population or be able to understand really operationally how these facilities want to be able to function. Then that will lead in and kind of inform some of the conversations in December 17th and 18th, which will be meeting with, those will be a little bit shorter meetings, but to be able to meet with each of the counties to really talk about population projections and really understand a second round of discussions on really justice system modifications within the both of the systems. The next round of meetings that we currently had scheduled is really going to double up. It's going to be a really busy week, so we're going to be meeting January the 14th and 15th, and then 16th and 17th on 2 different topics. The 14th and 15th will be our first round of programming meetings, so that's going to be really working with all these different stakeholder groups within the facility to start kind of going through what the different spaces and the different staffing within each one of those different spaces are actually going to be, and starting to build a space list for each of those spaces. And then on the 16th and the 17th is really going to be kind of closing out that justice systems and change management discussions for the systems as a whole that Karen will be involved with. And then moving into the next round of meetings, so on this February the 5th and the 6th is going to be our second round of programming. So we're going to be able to bring kind of a first draft of the space list of the program, reviewing that with all the different stakeholder groups, make sure that there's any modifications that need to be made. We'll also be projecting out and showing how those different spaces need to kind of grow over time, or the 5-year increments and 20-year long-term projections. So that will be that series of meetings, and so that round will also be with counties together as well as each of the counties independently. And then moving forward, we'll go into some of these concept design meetings and site test fits, and then later in the process, we'll be able to kind of narrow these meetings down to just 1-day meetings as we start going through cost modeling and financing options with the counties. So those meetings are typically have been scheduled in around on Wednesdays. So if we need to be able to have some of the elected official participation, it'll be a little bit easier to kind of work around those. So again, that's kind of the schedule as a whole. If we need to, as Mark indicated, add some additional meetings or slow the process down to allow the counties to kind of evaluate the different options to be able to make a final decision, we're more than willing to be able to do this. We want to make sure that you have ample amount of time to process, understand, and make an informed decision on the direction that we want the study to be able to go. Okay. So, almost done with us kind of presenting and really talking, and about to kind of get you more involved in this meeting. The next item was really the homework. So this has been kind of provided to Frank and Mark, and is being hopefully distributed out to the different stakeholder groups. So this is kind of a list of all the different information that we're going to be asking for, and all the data that we're going to be asking for. So it includes, understanding of what types of community-based alternatives are currently in place, so we know, as well as understanding how successful have they been, what type of demographics have been actually participating in those. We're going to be really looking at and needing to understand organizational charts so we understand the quantities of staff and what those staff's roles actually are and how they would actually interact with the jail as well as how they work within the jail. We are going to be requesting mission statements just so we understand at that point in time. I can grab that.
That's all good.
Yeah. So we can actually understand really what some of the goals and expectations both of the county as well as maybe possibly if there's a mission statement of the sheriff's office for how corrections are going to be provided within each one of your counties. We also will want, because we're going to have to do some evaluation of existing facilities for reuse, as well as it's beneficial for us to actually be able to look at spaces that you're currently in to understand program and program needs, drawings of your existing facilities. And since we're going to be really taking a closer look at Mason County's existing facility, we need some additional reports on if there's a hazmat study that was done, as well as for both facilities and new sites, information on geotechnical and site surveys, so we can actually get accurate numbers and informed and accurate design solutions for each of those different sites. We're also going to be asking for a lot of demographic information, both for the jail facility, but also system-wide on the court site, knowing that inflow and outflow of the jail is really informed by law enforcement and courts. So we need to understand what case filings actually are and some of the rest and booking data, so we actually can see if there's possibly an issue.
I can stay down. We're done with those.
Yeah, those we're pretty much done with those. So how that's really going to inform the jail protections and the jail needs of the facility. So it's a lot of information. It should be information that counties have gathered or previous studies in the past. So it's not new requests or new information that we're going to be asking of you to be able to gather. But we're going to need to be able to have all this information so we can be very accurate and informed with regard to what your needs actually are. So that's the homework that's been pushed out. We'd like to be able to have it back. I think the date that we said was like the 18th or the 19th of October, something like that. So we're about 2.5, 3 weeks away to be able to gather this information. As we've informed Frank and Mark, it doesn't have to be all pulled together and packaged up as a single document and sent to us. As this information is available and as you've been able to gather it, just get it to Frank and Mark and they'll get it to us and we'll start organizing it and disseminating it. So don't just kind of sit and wait until you got it all together. The sooner you get it to us, the sooner we can actually start going through it and getting organized for the first round of meetings. So that's kind of that component of it. Any questions on what has been sent out as far as homework? And there's a lot that's been going to the jail and to the sheriff's offices. So yes.
So here's some of it.
Wonderful.
My question is that on the jail stuff, you asked for monthly admissions, monthly averages, monthly. That would require us with our JMS system to run 120 separate reports, one a month for the last 10 years.
Right.
So what I did was I ran annual reports and gave you an annual average.
That'd be good.
Does that suffice?
If you could literally then just run monthly admissions for the last year.
Okay.
So we kind of have a snapshot to see if there's a seasonal month, and then that allows us to ask the question: what was kind of going on here? Was there a legislative thing? Is it really seasonal? What's kind of going on here? And it gives us a little bit more of a better understanding than going clear down to that monthly level for the last 10 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
On the Superior Court, you asked for case filings and case dispositions. Right. Dispositions, are you talking about, first of all, you're only looking on the criminal justice side.
Yes.
And on that side, are you just talking in judgment of sentences? Because there's a whole lot of other dispositions that happen on the
Yes,
calendar.
just sentences.
Just after the judgment of sentence.
Yep. Yes.
I'm with the district court, and we do have accurate probation. Would you also want to know people that are sentenced that are being sent back into jail for probation violations?
Yes, we would.
Boy,
And these walls are not very good for
I didn't
sticking
think
to.
I had that kind of power. But
Yeah, they're building. Mic drop. Yes, that would be. And part of this is also as we get this information and kind of go through it, if we see any holes in the documentation or the data, or we have questions, that gives us some time to reach out and say, well, what about this? Do you have this type of information, or we need to have this information to look into it? Yeah.
I'm trying to stay up there. What about things like as far as persons charged, they're held on bail, and that would impact the jail population. Do you want that information as well?
Yeah, well, essentially, yeah, that is kind of on, what we're kind of looking for is like, you know, a bond and bail profile and be able to see kind of what's going on there.
But my understanding is, I mean, at least statewide, a lot of the people in county jails are people waiting for their trials. They weren't able to bail out.
Yes, you know, for, yeah, typically in any jail facility, I think the national average is something like 60 or 80% is all pre-sentence. So that's literally just waiting for their sentence or waiting to be able to be bailed or be able to provide a bond to be able to be released. So that is the really big driver in any jail is actually all the pre-sentence component. And so that might actually be, when we actually talk a little bit about that, is wanting to have some discussions in these first couple of meetings with regard to, you know, what other type of kind of reforms do we, are the counties possibly open to interpreting or open to discussing with regards to potentially some of that. Yes?
So if you're looking at current admission levels into the jail, at least for Mason County, are you going to be taking into account that right now, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Chief Hansen, there are a number of people who would, by warrant or by court order, be taken into the jail that aren't because of our full population levels. We've got essentially Class C felonies and misdemeanors do not go in pre-sentence, even though there are court orders saying that they should.
Right.
And
I'm assuming some of that should be in the documentation that you have.
It will be reflected in the average daily
I just want to make sure that
population,
we're
so I
targeting that number and not the number that we're currently actually admitting.
Yeah. And can I borrow that little marker that you have there? So essentially what I kind of said, we need to kind of understand trend lines. Because essentially if we end up kind of looking at your current jail population that you've been at historically, it probably kind of rose for years, and then now it's been kind of stagnant for a while. And it's because of the facility. Doesn't allow them to actually be able to add those additional beds. So really that's going to be the understanding is both where should this trend line actually have been if you actually had those beds available, you know, was law enforcement changing their behaviors because they knew that there really wasn't any room in the end to be able to take somebody who really should have been in there?
Yes.
Or have you been laxing your risk assessment and risk matrix for actually releasing some of the jail population pre-sentence that if you had room, you probably will have kept them into jail. Maybe there's a modification and a behavioral change that actually has kind of occurred in the judicial system for that same type of issue. So really that's a big part of this is trying to really understand what the normalized benchmark population actually is, both for your facility as well as others that you've actually, an image you've sent out.
Speaking for Grays Harbor, we have been full for 20 years.
Yeah.
So we haven't been accepting misdemeanors or gross misdemeanors other than those mandated by law.
Right.
Since the 90s.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, and we didn't have a JMS back then.
Yeah. So that's where this is going to be a little bit art, and a little bit science, and really trying to create and understand exactly really what this historic trend line actually should have been, coming back to really today's date. And then those discussions about other alternatives and systems to be able to incorporate to say, well, you've done a great job of kind of keeping jail population down, but if you were here, but maybe if you actually ended up incorporating a couple of other alternatives, that really average benchmarking would be more here. And then that allows us to start looking at, okay, what is actual future growth and trend lines looking forward to be, which then gives us populations at 5-year increments in the future, which then allows us to actually start updating space lists based off of those needs. So that's why we need this historical data, which is kind of informing a little bit of future outcomes, but we have to be able to really create a true understanding of what your true trend line most likely should have been over the last 20 years, 15 years, or whatever, if the facilities weren't limiting some of your behaviors. Any other questions on some of the data that we've kind of asked for? And like I said, this is kind of a first pass. We'll get it. We'll start going through it. If we have any additional questions or need any additional information, we'll definitely follow up. But that's also what these meetings are for us to kind of start asking questions. Hey, we're seeing this in the data, then you can start informing us of additional information that we might not actually be able to see in the data, and sharing concerns or direction or information as far as that goes. So really that's where that would be beneficial. What was the next thing that I kind of had on there?
This big scroll.
Yeah, the scroll. Beyond kind of the homework.
One question.
So we have.
Yes, go ahead.
What I don't see up there under jail data is medical treatment needs, because that's becoming a huge factor in incarceration costs, jail medical. And maybe I just don't see it, so that needs to be a part of the discussion.
That will be definitely part of the discussion. We do have information on behavioral health and those type of aspects, but we will definitely be having a lot of conversations with regard to services that we'll be wanting to be able to provide within the jail facility, and that will be a big discussion on the medical component. What are we actually providing? Is this going to be dedicated a medical unit? What type of services are you going to be providing within there? Is it dental? Is it kind of minor treatment services, or are we actually doing some procedures within a medical unit? Are you doing and providing CPAP and other things actually in a medical unit, or is that in general population? All of those type of are going to be really part of that discussion.
I apologize, his head was in the way. So.
Yeah.
It's not that.
So yeah, that will definitely, medical and behavioral health is going to be a huge focus of our conversations that we have over the next several months.
So where did you leave off? Was that facility siting, previous planning efforts?
So
Is that
yeah,
homework?
Yeah. I think we're pretty much done with the homework.
Mm-hmm.
So then your next topic was the facility tours, which you kind of touched on.
Yep.
And then after that is the existing facilities.
Okay. Yeah. So the existing facilities, like we indicated in the homework, we were wanting to be able to have documentation of just what those existing facilities are. We know that not necessarily going to repurpose them or have the solutions for them, but it is going to inform us really some of the limitations and struggles that the counties have actually implemented or had to be working around over the last 10, 15 years. We will also be wanting to arrange tours of those facilities, and that will be probably in and around several of these other meetings, and we'll kind of work directly with you or ahead of those. Again, it will help to really inform us of how you've currently been operating and shed some lights for some additional questions possibly for us to be able to ask as part of these justice systems evaluation as well as on the programming side.
Facility siting.
Facility siting. So what we did end up kind of talking a little bit with Frank and Mark about is we do have time. We don't need to know exactly where the potential sites might be, but January, February really isn't all that far away. So we do want there to be some discussions occurring now and an understanding of really what sites are potentially available, or so when we end up getting there, we actually have something to be ready to talk about. I don't know, have you guys really started any of those conversations with the commissioners yet? We have provided to them just some, again, rough order of magnitude assumptions with regard to acreage that might be needed, both for individual facilities as well as a potential shared facility. Like I said, as we get further through and get more understanding of those jail needs, we'll be able to kind of refine that. But at least there's some general rule of thumb assumptions for really what an anticipated site might be, so we can start evaluating and looking at current county-owned property or other opportunities that are currently out there. Again, we could also evaluate kind of a theoretical site as well. Now, if there really isn't land that's been indicated as being an opportunity, we can always kind of say a theoretical site and do a planning study and evaluation for that as well. So that's something that we'll kind of get to a little bit later in the project, but we want to make sure that you are starting to consider that and evaluate that now.
And also understanding previous planning efforts.
Right. So we will, I think we do have some of your previous planning efforts, but if there's any other previous studies that were done, we would like to be able to have that, because that might actually, again, inform us on some of the discussions that actually were done during those meetings, and those studies that might actually change how we kind of frame questions or ask information moving forward. So they can be very beneficial, even though things might have changed a lot from the last study, which might have been just a couple of years ago or might have been a decade ago. So that is kind of part of the homework and some of the information that we're going to be asking for.
Yeah. And then also being able to create a public and community message as well.
Right.
So one comment would just be that it sounds like there's a little bit of uncertainty in terms of the issue of whether we actually look at a site or consider it to be a sort of generic potential site or sites. And that's something that we should probably get a little bit firmer grip on, because obviously if we start looking at real site potential, that kicks into the legal requirements of, you know, zoning and land use and public meetings and the like, when you're talking about potential for development with SEPA and just land use in general in terms of the type of use. And there's a whole public process that goes along with that we've been involved with many times, right? So the purpose of the study, I think we need to probably go back and look at that, right? And it's really to inform the alternatives and what's the best path forward for the project. Probably not what are the details about a particular site. So, you know, if you were to ask me what my preference would be for the purposes of this study, I would say stick with this idea that it would be a site somewhere between the two counties, or
but to be, I guess, a bit of a contrarian to that, though, that the site development costs can vary wildly.
That's where the risk is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that you want to know, we want, as a consultant, we want to know what that site is, because when we do cost projections, we want it to be as best data available we can give you. It's just the balancing of the idea that we would layer in yeah. So
Kelly kind of brought up. For all we know, you know, the counties have already kind of targeted a couple of different sites for siting, whether they're independent facilities or shared facility, which would be great.
Yeah.
But that's why I kind of also
And has
caveat that.
has that information been shared with us, the details of those?
Not yet.
Okay. Yep. And if the counties are comfortable with sharing that information with the understanding that this is a study to evaluate the path forward, it's not a study, it's not a siting study, right? That would trigger a land use process, right?
Yep. Exactly.
That's all true.
That is all true.
Okay. So if the counties are comfortable with sharing that information, the counties should know that if they do share that information, that our cost data that we provide would be
More accurate.
more accurate. Thank you. Okay.
Good, thanks. Was that it?
Public and community message.
Okay.
Have you covered that?
Yeah, we didn't. Again, as we kind of lead up towards funding solution, really that's where that's going to really be informing a lot of the and rolling up a lot of the discussions that occurred over the course of that to really describe really what that community message actually is. A big part of that's going to be really what the goals of the project actually are, but also you know, the benefits and the requirements of the site, of the project as well. So as we kind of get up to really looking at those different funding alternatives, a big part is going to really be framing that message and that outreach to the community. Like I said, what we currently have is, you know, briefings that we have with the Board of County Commissioners, but that might actually also implement some potentially, if it's desired by the counties, to actually have a community engagement as being part of the overall project beyond just briefings to the county commissioners. So that's something that we want you to kind of consider, as it might be beneficial to the projects as well as kind of the paving the way for those future conversations with the community.
Okay. Project goal exercise.
All right, so now any other kind of questions as far as what we've kind of covered to date, as far as kind of the scope of the project, schedule, direction, needs, all those type of things? Everyone kind of square? Yes.
I don't have a question, but I want to let you know if we're going to go on that tour, we're going to take the time to go to all these different facilities. There's some things that I would like to make sure that we cover and have for information. If we're
That'd be
take the
great.
time to do it. I'd like to be able to see what kind of each design has for risk to our staff members, because every different design has a different risk factor that comes in with it.
Right.
And I'd like to know what those differences are. I'd like to know, you know, this design, for example, the response time of getting somebody from this area over to that area to protect our officer that may be over here. I'd like to know the number of staff per inmate for each of the different designs that's required. I'd like to know if there's any layers of protection for the staff as well. You know, of course, inmate safety too. That matters just as much. So I want to know which ones are the safest for the inmates. Expansion possibilities of the different designs that you show us. Because we're looking at the different types of styles of being one unit together with everybody, but we're also may have to look at our own standalone or even overhaul. I'd love to know the square foot for each of the designs per inmate. And I'd like to also keep in mind that I'd be willing to look at anything that's not here that's national you guys can get information on. That might be the cream of the crop that we all should have and we all should be looking at. I don't want to be stuck in the box of just what we can get to from here.
You're right.
And also, one more point, one thing we're going to have to deal with, even to answer some of your questions, is what kind of management structure or control the facility is going to look like. The options that we may have, that may also help on determining how we're going to fund it, who's going to fund what, how it would be done, because one may be funding more operations, one may be funding more for facility. There's just different ways we may want to look at it, but deciding how it's going to be run may have an impact on those.
Well, that may be deciding too upon where it's located. If it's on the Mason County side, is Mason County gonna own it? Do we set up a different board
exactly what I meant, yes.
that owns it, and that isn't us but a separate board? Or if it's in Grace Harbor County, do we own it, or does how does operations come in? We've had discussions on that, and I think it's gonna be dialed in on one of these.
And you and I even talked about it that one time in the thing, but I know that it's going to be important for whatever decision we make that we actually establish that somewhere throughout this. It's not at the end.
No, it'll be throughout, and there's, we kind of hit on this during the interview, and Karen Shin talked a little bit about this, where she has been involved with creating regional entities in the past. Yeah, we're going to have some of those conversations all the way through. But yeah, that really does change whether this is one county actually owns the facility and it has a long-term contract for housing inmates of the other one, or vice versa, or you end up creating a separate entity, a separate board that manages the jail and owns the jail, and then both counties then have a contract with that entity, and how that might go. And the pros and cons of all those different permutations, I think, are going to be definitely a key driver to this. Definitely agree. Those are great comments on the tours. We were going to try to also provide you with floor plans ahead of that, total size of the facility from square footage, inmate population. The question about the staff to inmate ratio, that's a good data to be able to have. The comment that you brought in about the square footage per inmate as well as cost per inmate, really the cost per bed is actually a better indicator than cost per square foot of a facility, especially for correctional facilities. So that's definitely some of the data that we're going to try to gather.
Square footage was in case we had to overhaul what we have.
Yeah.
How many can you hold in certain areas?
Yep.
I'm not saying we want to do that, but if that's one of the three options we have to look at.
Yep.
And we're limited on square footage and what we have to do anything in.
Yep.
Will that be operational cost per square foot or construction cost, capital cost per square foot, or both?
Yeah, we can try to gather ahead of that. It might take a little bit longer to be able to pull that information for these different entities, what their operational costs are per inmate. But we can definitely gather that. If we can have it before the tours, we'll provide it. Otherwise, we'll provide it afterwards. All three of these facilities were actually planned for future expansion. Whether they were, it was shelled out, master planned on the site for future expansions. So those scenarios are a little bit different for each of the facilities, and so I think that'll be very applicable to you to really be able to understand what those actually are. But yeah, that'll definitely be indicated, and we can illustrate really what those future expansion opportunities for those three facilities actually are. Okay. Any other kind of thoughts, questions ahead of that? So what we want to do here, and this next is much more of you telling us and you talking and kind of conveying. What we wanted to be able to do is as more setting up goal setting to kind of get things going. What we have is these are as a list of national best practices and trends. But what we want to be able to have is for the different stakeholders and participants here to kind of indicate kind of some goals that you really want the facility to be able to have. And what we have, and put up a couple of different categories to kind of go into, possibly put some of these comments that come in. The one over here, starting here on the far right-hand side, goes without saying. So this is pretty much anything that we want it to be, safe and secure. We want it to be able to meet, 20-year growth projections. Yeah, we understand that. That's actually required expectation of our contract and the directive for the project, but we definitely want to be able to kind of document some of those things. Other things that, like if there's certain building components, functions, systems, spaces that you know that your current operations doesn't have, but you really wanted it to be incorporated into a jail project, say that. Let's get that indicated and get that kind of up there for program components, whether it's, you know, having, you know, arraignment court incorporated into it, or having, you know, X quantity of classroom spaces for use for programs, whatever that might be. That might be a driver for each one of you. That would be great to be able to hear. Community would be, you know, if there's something that's really focused on community, like more engaging of community-based programs, behavioral health systems, you know, design or quality that's more community focused or transparent, or illustrates you know, appropriateness of budgetary value, whatever it might be. You know, we can end up kind of putting that up under a community component. Operations, which kind of goes without saying, but you know, operational functions that you really want to be able to say, if you already know, hey, you know, we really want direct supervision or blended supervision model or whatever it might be, we would put those type of goals or expectations up there. Sustainability, you know, if there's requirements or expectations with regards to being a LEED certified or well building or net zero or net zero ready or whatever that might be for each of the counties, or any other sustainable, you know, feature of you know, daylighting for every location where a correctional officer might be, whatever that might, something like that. If that happens to be a goal that one of you might have, we end up putting those sustainable features and components up here. And then kind of a broader category of risks or opportunities that you might end up seeing with regard to the project. And those could be a wide range, but we wanted to be able to kind of hear from you now as we kind of start this. What are some of the things that you've been thinking about for the last 4 or 5 months since this was advertised and selected and now leading up to the kickoff? What were the things that you guys have been thinking about for the project?
And do we have a, how do you want them to do?
Yeah, why don't you hand them to us and we'll just kind of write, Amelia, we'll write them down as they kind of shout stuff out, and we can just stick them up there. So, yes, Judge.
Speaking as a judge, I think it's somewhat limited, you know, how far I can go, so I'll just leave it at this, just a few things off the top of my head. First off, there needs to be a facility with sufficient capacity so that people that the courts believe need to be incarcerated, be it sentenced, be it pretrial, you know, bail or what have you, there's room for them so we can actually enforce all of our laws.
Okay, so capacity, there's room in the end.
There's room in the end, that should probably go without saying.
Yeah.
Additionally, there needs to be, in my opinion, adequate video conferencing capabilities so that certain cases do not have to be brought, particularly in the fact that this facility will not be right next door to either courthouse. Third, there needs to be adequate facilities in the jail, whatever you build, so that attorneys can have confidential communication with their clients.
And not compromise the safety of the staff or the facility.
Yeah.
It has to be a separate area, separate from secure areas.
It would be nice to have facilities such as work release or what have you, so that there are some options besides warehousing people. And finally, obviously, whatever it is, needs to be safe for both people incarcerated and people working there. And I said that without anything falling down, so I'm going to shut up now.
Took a couple off my list, Judge.
That was really good. All right, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, kind of playing off what the judge said, I did speak with our Superior Court presiding judge about a facility and having arraignments by video. There are gonna be some things, obviously, you can't do a trial or your 3-5 hearings, those type of things. He was in support of that, but I think that you would want to, there's got to be a discussion between those parties, between the Superior Court and District Court judges of both counties, to make sure that if there are needs or wants from either county judicial area, that is taken into consideration.
Okay, so I'm gonna summarize that by saying courts coordination.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, that's
I
good.
think it will help a lot with the transport part of it, you know. When you look at food service and laundry and that type of thing, I don't, if it was a standalone facility, it goes without saying. If it's a joint facility, I just don't see the need to duplicate things. You know, if you have something that can handle the capacity of what you're building, there wouldn't be any need to duplicate. And I think that the same would be for transporting and other types of services that are being done, as long as there's coordination there.
Yep.
Yes.
So I would say, you know, I think one of the things high on my list is certainly room for programming and reentry programming. You know, I think that's a critical component of the rehabilitative process. Then along with that, we've been doing quite a bit of work on trying to bring in medical assisted treatment for opioid work. So just, I mean, keeping in mind all the medical needs, those kinds of facilities, and just sort of being forward thinking with that part of the facility.
That's medical. Never enough, right? So, yeah, that's got to be a whole programming discussion about what's provided, but that's a really great one. Yep.
Yes.
I think you're gonna have to have, depending upon the site, if you do a joint facility, depending upon the site location, you know, if you're on the farthest east end of Grace Harbor County, it's near McCleary. If you're gonna do something in that area, that's an area that's chosen, there's definitely gonna have to be community outreach with that city. And the same would go, I don't know of any potential areas in Mason County, but we've talked about some areas in Grace Harbor County. I think people are gonna wanna know and have an opportunity to ask questions and have input.
Community outreach. Yep. Public involvement. That's got to be.
No, I think it goes under community.
Yeah, I think community.
Yep.
So I don't know if this would be in the goes without saying category or operations, but I think having space for patrol deputies so that it's easy for them to get in and out, making sure that, you know, their turnaround time is quick and efficient, but also having workspace for them available if they need to finish things up, so that everybody's not, so that they're also not getting in the way of the jail operations side, so that there's just room for people to kind of get their work done timely, efficiently, and then back out on the road.
So separate patrol. Did I spell that right? Thank you. Good. You gotta have some spelling errors. Go ahead.
Yeah, probably operations. Yeah, that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, several different things. In that same light, I'd like to see us have a drive-in, drive-out situation for when it's load and unload in the prisoners, a safe, secure area. The van comes in, handles everything. This way,
drive-in, drive-out, Sally Port?
yes, it's but secured for them when they come in. It's a lot less likely that somebody's going to try and make an action, make a break, try and get one of our deputies something if they already know they're still low. So that doesn't seem expensive. I'm trying to keep the cost down too with that. Never heard of daylighting before over the top of them, but I dig that one. I'll take that one. I also would like to see us have whatever we do for our design, make sure it's easy clean for the hazmat issues that occur. Those are pretty over the top and disgusting, and as long as we build it that way instead of our concrete that just has painting over it, we may be able to make it through some of that. I'd like to see many separation spots throughout the facility to make sure it's a safety aspect as you go from one area to the other.
Say that one more time.
So it'd be like separation and security zoning almost?
Yeah, so when you're walking from one area to another, you're separated off, and then you can get to the other area and open that door and get through. So you also have places for our staff to be able to get to be safe, but at the same time, it keeps anything from breaking out and going further.
Yeah.
I'd also like to see us have an extremely safe outdoor area. What I mean by that is our one that we have here local, every once in a while has little issues. Luckily for our staff, they find it in time, but they get a hole in the fence and they get the possibility of getting a weapon that gets in there. That's just not even realistic. So being able to have a fence outside the fence, many cameras, but I just want to make sure that we try to keep contraband and weapons from getting in by controlling that area.
Yeah.
That seems to be a weak spot.
Yeah, that's always a challenge, yep. Okay.
So I toured a few years back, I toured the Pierce County Jail, and they said that one of the issues that they had was the male and female population, trying to make sure that they had enough.
Separation.
Yeah, separation, but also it was more mental than the separation. So you would have the nurse, they didn't have enough nurses or staff to provide assistance there.
Yeah, and that's what is it? Sight, sound, separate, complete separation.
Yeah.
That's one of the design goals.
Right. Yeah, they had the big, I don't know what you call them, community areas, I guess, but that's where they would sleep, and that's, if you had some of the gentlemen in there, the inmates, they had more severe mental issues than others that were in there, and so they did cause a lot more problems, and the risk to not just the inmates but to the jail guards was high. So I would like to see a smaller community areas, I guess. So
Cool down areas.
What's that?
Cool down areas.
Yes. Yeah.
Where you can calm down, relax.
But you did mention something about the
Mental health.
male-female population, so was that
Yeah, they had them
more
on
or
the
less
same.
saying,
Yeah,
make sure
they-
that you have appropriate facilities and
They
separate
had them on the
facilities
same
for both?
floor.
Okay.
And so the men could still see the women.
Okay, okay.
And so I think more separation, I don't think that they need to see each other.
No.
Don't most jails have segregation of where your,
Male.
that's not the right word, no, we keep our mentally ill separate from the general population?
So try this.
Jail.
Only because we end up with no other place to house them in a holding cell because our wife and poop all over the walls.
So now.
Right, that's what I'm saying, is that if we
actually
had,
integrate them as much as we can.
Right.
To a
But-
point.
Exactly, but when they can't be, then we separate them, of course.
Mentally ill it's a spectrum, it's not a
Yeah,
binary yes,
exactly.
no.
Right, yeah,
You know, typically, I think the national standard currently is about 80% of jail population has some form of mental health or dependency issue associated with them. Whether they are on, you know, the chronic or high risk end or just on the lower end. Then yeah, they're definitely, and that's again why it's not just in a behavioral health unit or in a medical unit. The behavioral health and mental health issue has to be almost system-wide within a jail, because you're going to have people with mental health issues in your general population units and everywhere else, just because it's so prevalent.
Yeah,
within
but
justice.
based on that, and that severity or that classification, you know, some of this suicide mitigation all comes into the design, and we've designed many facilities that are fully anti-ligature, so they're set up to deter any kind of suicide issues and things that might happen at a higher rate within that population.
And going back to your comment about separation of genders, it can be really counterproductive to women's processing if they're around men at the wrong time of their process. You know, even at reentry, you know, somebody can be in a work release program, be doing really, really well, and then they meet the right guy, and you know, so that's another element to mental health, behavioral health, and gender separation.
Commissioner.
In a perfect world where the state legislature fully funds mental health,
Yeah.
I'd like, goes without saying, that all these spaces be kind of adaptable so we can change them in the future to other needs.
Good.
Adaptability, flexibility. Perfect. Actually, I would put that under an opportunity, that is really a great planning solution you'll have. Judge?
Paul, I forgot one thing, but I think that we need to pay attention to the level of transport that's going to be needed, because the video will help, but you only go so far into the criminal process before it requires everybody's agreement to be on video, which means there's still going to be a lot of people that need to be taken to their respective courthouses.
Right.
And as a judge, I don't want to be in a situation on a routine basis that, you know, when they're going to get here or what have you. And for this to work, I think that's something we have to be paid very close attention to.
Staffing.
I think
like is what he said.
staffing and transportation.
Staffing.
I want to bring that up again too, and the reason for that is that in a place very close to here, that wasn't given due consideration when a new jail was built, and so it sat empty for a long time.
Right.
And I think that if you or your team, depending on the style or type of facility, make at least a recommendation, not for the very minimum amount that you can get by with on the most minimum day of the week, but what it's going to be to run the facility appropriately, to get people back and forth to court, to have people safely manage a population, because I would hate to see something like this get done and then sit for 7 years like other facilities have, because that wasn't figured in.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a big risk. Stan, somebody? Go ahead.
So kind of the flip side of that is much of the population that visits the current inmate is indigent, and arranging transportation for them is difficult. And so we're going to have to figure out some way, if you're taking people from Shelton and putting them out at some spot remotely in between the two, how are the indigent families, I don't know of a convenient small way of phrasing this, but
I think that might fall under accessibility.
Yeah,
Accessibility can be ramps, it can be sidewalks that are safe, and like, you know.
Well, I think he's talking
about.
And that's
how does the family that has no working car and no driver's license?
That's a big part of the that's a big part of transportation, is really focusing on release, and that's actually going to be a part that you'll see when you go out to Skagit County. Their facility moved, 3 miles south of town from being downtown. So, okay, how are we dealing with inmate release? And so it was a long conversation. They actually went with transit to actually add a bus stop right at the jail. So anyone that was being released and didn't have a vehicle or whatever, they just literally walked out the front door, had a regular going bus, mass transit, gone back downtown, was able to go. So that had to be part of the overall plan of what do we do and how are we releasing them? What door are we releasing them from? Because that allowed them to be the close proximity to transit and those type of things. So yeah, it's a wonderful, it's definitely a thing, especially when you start going regional and the facility is not located, in either downtown metropolitan areas.
Right.
So, good.
Yeah, we're on the transportation, for transit and stuff like that. I'd like to, 2 things. If this is, if I had all the money in the world, I'd love to see us have a high vantage security on the higher areas. If we're going to have race tunes, which probably will because everybody will feel cramped, it'd be nice to have some type of vision vantage point from the top to be able to look down. And I'd also like you to actually take that flexible spaces and also add another one under sustainability, because if you design it in a way we have flexible spaces in the beginning, he's right, the state keeps talking about that and fighting about it, and eventually it is gonna cave, and there's gonna be some money available for those beds to happen. That can be part of your sustainability if we have income coming in for that.
So what you mean is flexibility for
Expansion.
Expansion, mental health beds or whatever, because there may be a slice between the two of them.
Yeah, I'm dreaming, but.
No, but I like your dream, because I think that may be the next wave. If you have jails that are capable of having that, because they're already the same inmates anyway, having some of that, you may be able to get that be your first thing for the dollars to come out directly for. So having that flexibility, but that would be part of the sustainability, because with each one of that is dollars that comes in to help the operations.
You bet.
I've got a quick question for the judges here. Are there any things that need to be changed as far as trial laws that would allow more flexibility in hearing cases here that could not be heard in separate counties?
Oh.
Well, okay, so that raises an interesting question, is that the superior courts have to be our operation. Our hearings have to be held here in the county seat. Okay, same as yours.
But that could be a law change if we...
Not superior court. District court. There are certain steps that can be taken that a district court can be held out of the county seat.
How is that?
I have no idea how they do it, but I looked
But
at the statute and I looked
if a
at the
person
case
was in
law.
Grace Harbor, for example, can you still hold the hearing here?
Well, no, on the district court side, there can be an approval though.
I'm just saying, would this be an opportunity to go to the legislature?
Legislative change, but under the current law.
Yeah, not under the current law.
I don't know how that happens. Simply because of the case allocation time specifically came out of their justice issue.
Yeah.
That's interesting. We might want to ask Benton County.
You have a
terrible
That's possible. But
Yes.
right
Video
now,
from-
that
the
is.
district
That's
court
really
judge
effective.
is
I think
correct in
if
that
they
it
do
does
it,
require levels of agreement that go beyond a certain type of hearing. Okay, so that's really.
Anything else would take a state law change.
The offender has to.
Change your state law.
If you're talking superior court.
Yeah.
The district court, I think you have a little more wiggle room. But that being said, if we're talking a regional center, is that regional center is in Grace Harbor versus Mason County, that makes a big difference on that issue.
Yeah, and I don't really know, because that does occur where you can have an arraignment court outside of the county seat, but that's still located within the county for district court. Now, if it's literally in a totally different county, that's going to be an interesting kind of conversation to be able to have, if that can even happen.
I don't think it's possible. Yeah. But on that point, okay, so if we were talking about video arraignments, and I think that arraignment is a good word because that's the primary function. There's other functions, identification, whatever. There's other functions that can happen there. But the facility needs to be well thought out. I think the judge still touched on that. The other thing to think about, though, is that with a remote location, we need to have access. The attorneys that represent these people need to have access to these people. Okay, so, and we ran into this before when we were outsourcing. So the facility needs to have some sort of place for their attorneys to be able to meet with them. And also, from the public defense, I don't want to step on Mr. Jones's toes, but public defense wise, they may very well want to have a satellite office there as opposed to just a place to meet people, but that
I'd say, that depends on what all functions are happening out there.
Exactly. Exactly.
Public
buildings on it, maybe.
On the other side of the
Satellite
transportation.
office for attorneys, so that would be whether it's districts, or prosecuting, or defense, they're.
Yeah, I can't speak for the prosecutor either, but on the transportation side, we talk about being able to go to the facility and pick people up. When you pick them up, you gotta bring them somewhere, okay? You're not gonna be bringing them all into the courtroom at the same time. So there needs to be some sort of a facility that's created, it's a holding. Same token, again, back to their ability to be able to meet with their attorneys, there needs to be some provision for that as well. So not only are they holding, but they also have that ability to meet, because otherwise they might not have it on.
Clean up the upstairs.
I got another design when it's fairly simple but not thought about often. I'm working in a location where they modified a jail, and our staff, our support staff working inside, They came up with the great idea of having a place where all the inmates could reach the bus, but every night our support staff in the hours of 4:30 in the afternoon during the winter had to walk right through where those inmates are releasing, and those are really the staff that are working in the courtrooms, our judges and things like that. I'd like to see having some type of an entrance point or at least a sufficient parking area that is accessible to our officers of the court and to our staff that are not having to walk through the inmates that they just got done seeing in the courtroom in the dark in the middle of the winter time by themselves.
I'd be okay with that.
No, that's a great point.
On your site selection, you might want to ensure that whatever site is selected, that there are utilities available nearby versus having to put that infrastructure in. It can be quite expensive.
It could be. And again, that's where this is kind of so unique, is that you might be paying more for the acquisition of the site because there are infrastructure that's already located there for either street access or for utilities there, versus a true greenfield site that has none of that you're going to have to then pay to be able to put all those in. Like when another regional jail, again, it's more misdemeanor, but when SCORE, which is in the South King County, was built with the 8 different participating communities into it, they were able to purchase and acquire land, but it had no access and it had no utilities. So I had to build a 1 mile road going into the site, as well as extending all utilities, power, water, sewer, that 1 mile in. So that was a cost that had to be incorporated, but that was offset with the land value and being able to acquire it at a very, very low rate due to the participating cities that were involved. So yeah, that's really going to be really weighing those, but utility costs and utility that infrastructure putting in can be a huge cost and driver of the project.
Is SCORE a municipal jail?
Yes.
So
but they do have contracts, and it's designed to be a medium security facility, so they do have contracts with counties as well as other agencies.
So do we know if there is a cross-county facility in the state? That like the judge was talking about, where you have cases in Grace Harbor and
Chelan's a regional facility.
Yep.
Yeah, and then what Spokane Valley has been talking about and planning it, but it's not built. Yeah, I think Chelan might be the only one that I'm aware of.
or Douglas is.
Douglas rents beds from Chelan.
I think Yakima County rents out a lot of theirs.
And
they do.
Yeah, and I said that wrong.
Those are all contract.
Yeah.
That's all.
And they do have,
I'm talking about that
video
court
advisements and
piece.
stuff like that, I believe, that as part of those some of those contracts.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they do that there.
It may just be transport.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Mike.
Yes, I have about 15 items here. So.
All right.
Okay, so a couple of them are, this is the second time I've been through this jail building process, so I'll take a little bit of what I've learned in the past, a little bit of what I've seen in this facility, and I'll give you some suggestions. So first of all, and this is simple, vents. The vents that go to the inmate rooms. They love to plug the vents with toothpaste and toilet paper. There's a simple way to fix the problem. You fix it, you put a cover over it, you make air blow up the wall or down the wall or whatever, so they can't get access to the little holes to plug the vents. Because when they plug the vents, it screws up the HVAC system for all the rest of the inmates in that particular unit. Yep. So vents, come up with some other solution other than the typical standard correctional vent that they put in an inmate room, because they suck.
Yep.
Drains.
Yep.
For whatever reason, architects don't put drains in day rooms in jails. And I don't know why. Because most oftentimes when somebody floods their cell, where the heck does the water go? It gets squeegeed up into a mop, and then it gets put into a bucket, and then they, or into the shower or whatever it might be. So drains. Drains are super important to have in almost any living area.
Yeah, not just in the cell, but actually out in front.
In the day rooms.
in
Yeah.
the day room.
Outside
Yeah.
cells, in the day room, so
Yeah.
they can't plug them up.
Exactly.
With towels and other things, big drains.
Adequate staff lounge area and break areas. You know, a place for our staff to get away from the work for their half-hour lunch or their hour lunch, or whatever it might be, so they can separate themselves from the daily operations and they can have some sunshine or, you know, whatever it might be, an outdoor area or whatever. But some nice place for our staff to be able to get away from the work. One of the other things I've seen over the years is the security control systems. And I know that, you know, the life expectancy of any computer system is about 3 to 5 years. And unfortunately, you know, all these security control systems are all driven by computers. And I don't know what the answer to it is, but coming up with some kind of security control system that doesn't have to be replaced every 3 to 5 years. And I don't know even if that's possible, but as far as the security controls.
One thing I'll say on that is that, you know, one that's not proprietary. That
Correct.
You have to go back to the same vendor over and over, and you have no competitive
For
pricing.
sure, and we have maintenance agreements and things like that.
So that if you do need to make changes in the future, you can have an open platform.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
And as far as, and additionally to the security control systems is the archiving of video or audio or whatever it might be. We need to make sure that whatever system we put in place meets the Washington State Archive standards. You know, because we have to store that information for whatever amount of time, depending on what areas record the facility. So we need to make sure we have adequate storage processes for that. The heating and cooling systems, you know, brand new heating and cooling systems are installed in facilities, and inevitably, rooms, the inmates that have the outside wall rooms are cold, and so we have to give extra blankets, or the day rooms are cold, or the booking area is warm, and the hallways are hot, or whatever. We need to make sure that it has adequate controls, and as well as adequate volume, or you know what I'm talking about. Capacity, yeah.
Yeah, so, that's, jails can be
terrible.
Poor air quality, and this is the answer. To
for sure.
Health and safety.
Radios, all jails, well, every jail I've ever been in, all staff has some kind of a radio communication systems. Having radios that function in all areas of the jail oftentimes is challenging because of all the materials that the jails are built out of: steel and glass and concrete and rebar.
Incorporating into acid.
So when we go to talk about low voltage systems and communication systems, we need to make sure that, you know, we properly vet all areas of the facility to make sure that radio communications are available in every single area of that jail.
So this is more like a hardwired type.
Access to programs for both male and female. And if we're sharing spaces, you know, I mean, oftentimes most of our jails, even newer jails today, don't have separate areas for male and female services. So we have to share those areas, and then it comes down to a scheduling thing. You know, we have NA that comes in, and we have one group of NA service providers, and then they have to put one program on for males and one program on for females. And we just need to make sure that we have adequate space to do that somehow, as well as, you know, NA, AA, whatever it might be, GED programs or whatever. We just need to make sure we have adequate space for both males and females. When we're talking about space for males and females, we also need to consider having the space for the like the work release. If we decide to have work release in our jails, you know, we can't house work release females with male work release people. And when you have work release people that are coming in and out of the facilities every day, you have to keep those separate, physically separated from general population because of the access to, you know, in and out of the jail all the time. So however we design the facility, if we have some kind of alternative sentencing or work release or outside work program, that area needs to be specifically separated from the secure areas of the facility, the general population. It has to be separate. I know you guys know that, probably goes without saying one.
Well, actually, it's different because that can actually be done two different ways. In the tours, you're going to see it done two different ways. How King County did it is drastically different than how Skagit wanted to do it. And again, it was an operational preference.
Yeah.
And so I think those are all good conversations to be able to have.
Mental health pods, that's kind of where generally across the country that they're going. They're, the Disability Rights of Washington, the ACLU, all the advocacy groups are really frowning on facilities housing mentally ill people in holding cells and isolating them because of their disability. And there's been counties across the state, across the nation actually, that have actually generated or created mental health pods. Dedicated mental health pods, yeah. And that's kind of the trend in the future. I believe that's the trend in the future, that with the pressure that's being put on us politically from, like I said, the advocacy groups, is to go in that kind of direction.
Definitely.
And I also believe it's probably in the best interest of the inmates who suffer from that, not to segregate them. So,
Along with that is adequate room for administration and counselors who can be involved in that process. And
that's
also
another one on my
space
list.
for meditation and being able to control those substances both in and out and being passed out to patients.
Correct. Yep. Way he said. Exit from the control room for the control room operator in emergency situations. There needs to be some kind of egress there. I've seen it done through a ladder, through a lock thing, through the roof to get out of the facility. Like if there was a riot or something or whatever it might be, there's got to be some egress and a toilet in the control room. Sometimes that control operator is getting a bathroom.
Oh, simple, but that's an absolute, never thought about it.
Operator toilet.
Yep, no, that's all great.
Stack of dependents.
Which isn't really good when somebody's got to go in there and use it for number 2, but that's the biggest thing one of the other biggest things I've seen is having enough individual lockdown rooms, individual single cell rooms. It's expensive to build them, I know it.
Yep.
But whenever I've seen the jail built, the biggest complaint from the chiefs is there's not enough places to segregate people or to separate people. I shouldn't say segregate because there's a huge difference between segregate and separate.
Yep.
We got to separate people, and I just see way too many times there's just not enough of those individual lockdown rooms and places to separate people.
That would be my concern when you have direct supervision as the top of the national best practice. We had that here at one time. The problem was that we simply did not have places that we could remove people out of that population, like the chief's saying, and put them. And that resulted in a huge problem for us to have to reconfigure the jail.
Yep. Staff parking. That was kind of hit upon about the court staff, prosecutors and things, and defense attorneys, but jail staff parking, they need to have a secure area. We've had our staff cars broken into out here on the sidewalk. And if they fight for space when they come to work on day shift, there's just no place to park. So we just need to make sure we have enough staff parking in some kind of a secure area. Okay. And so that's safe when we do shift change at 6 o'clock at night in the winter, that they're not walking down the sidewalk in an unlit hallway or alleyway or whatever. And the other thing that a lot of jails are going to now is these full body scanners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I know they're expensive. There is some grant money available, but we've had quite an influx in the last couple of years of people stuffing stuff up inside of them and bringing it into the jail. And I know Cowles County's got one now. I think Pierce County's got one.
Yep.
And they're really beneficial to trying to keep that contraband from coming into the facility, drugs and weapons and things like that. So, maybe we don't get the body scanner, but at least we'll have a place in the public lobby or in the intake area to have it, so that we can plug it in if we ever get one or whatever. Yeah. Data services like network services, like access to the county IT systems or something in the intake area. However that intake area is going to look, so that if we decide that we want to have the arresting officer when they come in do a data entry, initial part of the booking. We can have access to data right there, you know, a computer terminal, instead of having come all the way into the booking area and sit behind the booking area to do it. Just have the ability there to have access to that. Contract bed space, you know, we are in a little bit different situation than I think most counties in the state, is that we're right next to DOC. And I think that there's a revenue source there, for both counties, that we can really tap into to kind of offset some of the staffing expenses to staff this facility, to rent some space to the Department of Corrections. So I think that when we're talking about how big a jail to build, or you know what kind of beds we're going to make, we need to heavily take that in consideration of, you know, how many beds will DOC commit to, or you know, on a short-term and long-term basis. I think we need to take that in consideration, look at leasing.
Well, there's a number of counties on this side that are still sending their people to Yakima.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know that, I know defense attorneys that complain all the time about having to cross the border to see their clients in the winter.
In 2015 or 16, we took in $550,000 with that.
Just through contract.
Yep. There's a huge pot of money there that's available if we have the space and the staff.
We also have the same thing with the smaller cities too. Several of the contract beds would contract beds, but we can't do it now.
Could you do the same with tribes?
Yes. Yeah, and you know, there's been some talk, you know, that, you know, I know that when we talk about funding sources at some point, you know, I think that we really need to get the tribes involved early in this process, and because, you know, that is a potential area, I think, maybe for some additional funding, or maybe for some funding for a facility. They did it with one of the local fire departments. You know, they helped fund the fire department here in Mason County, and so, you know, that might be an option. I mean, with some kind of partnership with them, I don't know about.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one.
The video arraignment areas that we've talked about need to be in an area that is accessible for the council. And it can't be within the secure area of the facility. So the video arraignment area needs to be, you know, like in the visitation area, that's got to be separate from the secure areas of the facility. There's got to be some kind of barrier there so that we can keep the civilians out of the jail, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's got to be some kind of separation. Make it still so it's accessible, readily accessible, so they don't have to go through, you know, a bunch of screening to get in there or whatever.
I'm fine with not running into the majority of the jail population anytime I'm going for a business. Like,
and the last thing I had on my list was adequate admin, you know, office staff, support staff space. You know, counselors, support staff, warrants people, secretaries, clerks, whatever, you know, we need to have more than enough office space, because I found that you think you have enough, and then all of a sudden you think, oh gosh, you know, I need another secretary, I need another clerk, or I need another whatever. So we need to have a generous amount of office space and office workspace, you know, like an office workstation, you know, with copiers and printers and cabinets and storage and whatever. And storage. You know, we need to store mattresses, we got to store, you know, uniforms, we got to store whatever it is, gaming supplies, you know. I mean, there's got to be readily accessible to the staff. And so,
including that your BAC room, because our BAC room is now office space, and our BAC room's not in the jail. You know, I mean, we really need to have those areas where outside agencies like the State Patrol or any other agency making an arrest can make that arrest and have that BAC room accessible, not have to go downtown somewhere and then transport them again over to the jail before you can put them in.
That administrative and, you know, just general office space could be even more critical and more important if it becomes a regional jail. And that was one thing that SCORE kind of under-anticipated. And in the end, they ended up having to kind of convert and build out about twice as much for both, you know, accounting and general administration and those type of functions, because everything they had planned and they thought once they got into it for a year or two, and they're like, wow, we really need a lot more space. So that'll be critical.
Training space.
Training room, yeah.
Training room,
Yeah.
big enough for staff.
Conference room, training room.
What about durability and life expectancy of the building, of the spaces?
Is there any kind of goal or expectation? Is this?
Well, I think the expectation
be-
needs to last at least 40 to 50 years, because that's how long it will take to get around to
Do it
complete
again?
this process again.
And that's good to know. And
Yeah.
that does change whether this is a 30-year building or a 50-year building or a 100-year building. Those are different systems that end up being.
And that's just my opinion, so.
Yeah.
Well, I think when we go to the taxpayers, and eventually ask them for money, they're gonna say, how long is this gonna be? You gonna build a new one in 10 years or 20 years? I mean, we should be able to say, you know what, we plan for the next day.
You know, another one that I've seen a couple times, it's gonna be a building design one, is that, in a number of different jails I've worked in, is that when there is something added on, because of the way they're constructed, there needs to be areas that you can run wiring and other things through in the future, because they always say, oh, we can't do it because it's a 4-foot thick concrete wall, so now we're gonna have to run exposed wiring or drop it down from the ceiling or run it across the floor or something. And I think that when you do that and you're thinking you don't need that, eventually there always needs to be more wires run from more computers or something, and to have them, taped to the ceiling for the next 20 years just is not acceptable, because each time he said, well, the way it was built, there's no way to put this in without tearing out a whole wall or millions of dollars or whatever, but some other way to access additional, I don't know what you want to call it,
Pathway.
wiring, whatever it is, because the building is built solidly thick. You're not having to drill through or take out walls just to get up.
And that's not only the staff areas, but that's also to all the inmate, like day room areas, because, when we go contract out for commissary services, or we contract out for, inmate kite system or visitation or whatever it might be, and, we may have to change those systems if we go with one vendor or another. So there needs to be data and power to every single day room.
Mobile
fashion.
conduits, it's not even.
Yeah.
That's
as long as it's then when you put it in, it's not even expensive, so we should be able to do something like that.
And have it be expandable, like you mentioned, as far as being able to add pods or beds or however, whatever the system is set up to be able to expand.
Yeah, those are all really good ones. I can tell you guys have been involved.
Headache.
Not only operationally, but like you said, you've been through a project and you're pointing out a lot of the issues that arise on this type of a facility. So that's really good.
And this is kind of outside my realm, it's more for the commissioners, but to me, the agreed upon funding, especially in this regional, how we're gonna get to that point, because, we can plan for the Lamborghini, but we might be able to afford the Ford Escort, so, at some point, we gotta have at least a scope, because it seems to me we're so wide right now that we gotta at least have an idea where we're going.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with those efficiencies that can be identified, right, just in terms of operations. And then we'll set the standard for what that acceptability is, what the bed ratio might be in terms of dormitory versus cells, and that's going to control a lot of what you talk about in terms of the durability, the expected life expectancy of systems and building components, and that all becomes part of that decision making. Another tool that we've used in that is life cycle cost analysis when we do planning, to look at selection of systems and materials based on what their expected cost over time is rather than just that first cost.
I was gonna say, kind of going off what the chief mentioned, the cost is obviously very important, and it may be the deciding factor of whether we do a standalone or a joint facility is based upon what the cost would be. I think that there are ways to build in cost reductions that with avoiding duplication, but when you're going to the voters to ask for a bond to be approved, it can be challenging, and I agree that the question's gonna be asked, how long is it gonna last? Like the chief said here, there's gonna be lots of community outreach for that, and the cost may be a deciding factor on how we proceed.
Sure. Yeah. What about some sustainability items like vehicle charging stations.
Or stormwater management, you know, if there is.
You have to
like
have that.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah, rain gardens, I don't know,
Green.
Yeah.
Go green.
Yeah.
West solar,
You know,
green wetlands if we include solar.
Farming and
you know,
aggregation.
Yeah, I mean.
You know, for inmates. You know,
But I would just caution that with, you know, with a lot of that, you know, being able to bear out an actual savings or an efficiency standard that is practical, not doing it to say we have the greenest jail in the state, you know, which might be okay, but I mean, I think that drives costs too. So doing what we need to do in order to find the actual energy efficiencies that are beneficial, not just doing it to do it.
What are the, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing about the solar is that can also bring in revenue. If the PDs have to purchase the excess power and stuff during the day, and you have a lot of roof space. Yeah.
Water reclamation.
Depends on where it's located too, though.
Collecting rainwater and being able to use it as potable water for toilets.
You're saying it's sunnier in Mason County than
No, I'm saying it depends on where the next hill is, because the hills are always there.
The solar that I put up, you know, obviously through Commerce Grants, they've actually quadrupled the amount through the state Commerce Grants for solar. So there might actually be more and more opportunities in the near future to actually be able to get matching grants or grants through the state to be able to fund that. But I agree, you know, to be able to put solar on just for solar's sake, even though the payback is 20 or 30 years, doesn't make a lot of sense. But you know, if what ends up being evaluated is the payback ends up being with solar grants 5 years or 6 or 7 years based off of a 50-year facility, well, maybe that starts to be an actual very good investment and utilization of public funds.
I was going to actually jump back before we started discussing solar.
Yeah.
But as far as selling this or to the community and what have you, and this is anecdotal, but I ran for this position last year for the election. Part of what I discussed when I was out talking to people was the situation we have with what we have now. And in Mason County, I'm not going to speak for Grace Harbor, except they do have nice murals in their courtrooms, I have to say. But the point is, a lot of people weren't really aware, and again, I was a municipal court judge before I was doing this, and I was telling people about the numerous times we've had to just issue warrant, warrant gets served, they're released, issue warrant because they don't show up, to where effectively the ability to enforce the laws was just stopped. You couldn't do it. And people aren't aware of that. When they were aware of that, like, really? I think if that message is sold, you know, first off, people have to understand there's a problem before you start offering a solution.
Yeah.
And so we have to sell what the problem is and then start offering the solution once we get an idea of what the solution is going to be.
Yep. So forms of media, perhaps?
I would suggest all sorts of things.
That's really community awareness of the problem, right? That's what I heard you say.
Mark, can you fix the boards?
No.
No.
Don't stand on the
It may not be very sustainable where it's coming.
That happened while I was speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, tape.
Yeah.
So one of the other things I think is important when we design the facility is the staff and inmate flows. You know, how the staff gets to, from one living area to the next living area to the next living area to do their hourly checks. Do they gotta go all the way out into the hallway and then back into a day room? Or can we put a door in between, you know, the individual pods so that they can go right on the upper tier, walk all the way around, then down the bottom tier?
Yeah.
Can we put the recreation yards right adjacent to a pod so that we don't have to take inmates out of the units, out through a hallway and then back into a visitation area? You know, can we put, or I mean a recreation area, can we do something similar at the visitation area, you know? Try to design the facility so we limit the inmate movement outside of those living units as much as we can, and try to be as most efficient with our staff movement as we can and still, you know, meet our missions.
I saw something similar to that. I visited the Kootenai County Jail. We've done some updates and changes over there. And some of those things the chief's talking about, they took into consideration. It was interesting.
What was that?
How they changed in the Kootenai County Jail. And also they, I think the commissioner made a mention. They also, when I went through there, they had some viewing areas that you have staff that are watching that by camera, but you also have eye-to-eye contact over the top where you can see the areas. It's kind of like overlooking a maze or something.
Yeah.
But the supervisory staff could oversee a large amount of area.
Yeah.
Just by a couple movements turning around, you can see the whole jail.
Yeah.
You know, I walked through there a few times over there, and that just reminded me of that. I don't know who designed that, but I thought there were some interesting things that they did to increase their ability to not only watch by camera, but to observe from above everything. If you were staffed to oversee a larger area, I guess.
That's what I meant by the vantage point.
Yeah, so the staffing is one aspect of that, but also just the safety and security.
Yeah, Kootenai County is interesting.
So,
I don't.
You know, when you have that ability for that direct sight line, there isn't those blind corners where something
Right.
could happen without an officer or something actually being aware of it. And so that safety element is equally as important as, or even more important than the staff efficiency side.
Well, also, they're looking down all the time. If they start looking up the rubbernecking, that shows up to everybody
Yeah.
that's watching them. That rubberneck action is like a big flag. Look at me, I'm about to do something.
Yeah, no, right on. Good.
Great.
I think as far as community outreach, I think a lot of people, because I also ran for office last year,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are confused about the classification of the inmates. You can't have, you know, this type of classification with this type of classification or this, you know, crime. And so I think that would be something that we need to help educate the public on the understanding.
Yeah, really jail operational requirements. Yeah, they think, oh, you just kind of throw everybody together and it's all fine versus
And
we gotta
then-
separate co-defendants, we have to separate male, female populations, we have to separate, yeah, exactly. So there's more to it.
Yeah, along with that would go like juvenile type programs for high school, elementary, where we do programs like Scared Straight, you know, where we bring them in and show them what eventually could happen if they go down a certain path, worst case scenarios.
What about adequate public access to, you know, the facilities? So having some kind of a, you know, reception area that's staffed by a support person that would answer phone calls from the outside, that, you know, would take bail, that would, you know, conduct regular business. I don't know if you guys have that, but we don't.
No.
Our control room operator does that right now. And,
Right.
You know, so having a very professional looking place for the public, reception area for the public, yeah. Because you know what, let's face it, it's a professional business and we want it to look professional and we want it to be serviceable to the community and we want to make it comfortable for the people that have to do business in the jail. And you don't want some concrete bench out in the lobby.
Yeah, there's a balance there, but you
Yeah.
want it to have a welcoming element to it. At the same time, it needs to be secure and
Correct.
safe, yep.
You guys have something for, there was another one I noticed at that other jail that was interesting, but it's something with design, but I look at some of the jails, and ours is one of them that, you know, everything's painted, and much of that paint has been in there since 1985 and not changed. The floor's all peeled up, and it looks like garbage, and is there some other design mechanism or something that you can do that makes these things a little easier to clean, and so that your floor isn't peeling up like ours is, and big chunks of it missing because the materials they put down on it didn't last? Also, it creates problems with biohazards and stuff. To have that floor, I don't know what you want to call it, bare floor epoxy or something, so that.
A lot of institutions, you know, you'll do stained concrete, we'll use epoxies, and you know, even stained concrete meets all the sustainability criteria. You're not installing a product that is going to wear out and peel off and go to the landfill. You've actually you've got the opportunity to do design to add color even, and make it durable and very cleanable. In
So
terms
you're
of
talking
health
about
requirements.
materials that are like
Yep.
high performance and safe.
Just talking about like the
Yeah.
walls and things, some of ours were painted and they get, then plastered and they get chipped and they get holes in them and they need to be painted and fill the holes in again, where it's not gonna be something that's, I just think that there'd be something more efficient than to have to do that all the time. I think our maintenance staff continually have to repaint things where they sit there and chip away at the paint to where you don't get to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So the maintenance staff isn't always gonna have to repaint and
There's
constantly.
a lot of technology that's actually been developed for different systems that are more applicable and have been developed for correctional environments. And some of them actually have systems that have been actually incorporated into them for actually killing bacterial. And so
There's some high performance like epoxy systems that replace traditional tile in shower and kitchen areas.
Yes, there was another
So
one.
it's monolithic with no grout joints, so it's healthier, and it's like it's like hard glass. You can't break it, you can't chip it off.
We went through that a few years ago with the showers too, that absorbed
Yeah.
microorganisms. Somebody had it re-epoxied and,
Yeah.
you know, just something that's a little easier to keep clean and
Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
lower
So
maintenance.
we would be definitely looking at all of that when the time.
And I'm assuming that we're gonna make sure that the cameras aren't pointed towards the showers and things like
Priya,
that, right?
yeah.
Priya.
That was one of the things
Yeah,
I
it's
saw.
on there, I saw
Yep,
that.
for sure.
You know, a half shower curtains or, you know, whatever it is.
Yep.
You know, we gotta be able to protect that.
Yep.
Protect the inmates from.
So you want to be able to see, you want to balance that security need with the laws of the land. And, yep.
What about mop bucket storage?
Yeah, you need it.
It's gotta be readily accessible.
Yeah.
Without a whole lot of staff intervention.
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
something that, you're right, again, gets left out
Yep,
and ends up getting stored in a plumbing
Closet.
chase or something.
yep.
Yep.
Mop bucket storage, right?
Yep.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, wow.
Any other kind of thoughts, kind of concerns? One thing that I kind of hear quite a bit with these type of facilities is again that community perception. You know, is it too nice? Is it you know, the materials that's actually used and what the community sees driving by it? It's either we want it so it's conveys the values of the community, or it conveys the approach to using public funds in the most appropriate way. You know, so it can kind of cover the whole gamut. Is there
Well, they gotta be vertical ladder.
Yeah.
We won't have the money for if it happens. It ain't gonna be the Taj Mahal. It ain't gonna be that.
Mhm.
We can't afford that stuff. If we're
Yeah,
gonna
we don't
pull
need
this
fountains
off-
and ponds and stuff
Yeah.
outside. That kind of stuff doesn't go over well.
Yeah, one thing.
Fancy landscaping
Yes.
and ponds and creek beds and everything else.
One thing that we might also consider with this study is, you know, when you look at the alternatives of independent, together, shared, from public perception, from this stakeholder group's perception, what are the consequences of doing nothing? In other words, documenting, what are the consequences of no action on this? And I don't know if that wants to be,
talking about.
I don't know if that wants to be part of this study effort, but when it comes to educating the public, and I think that was one of the tags that we put up there, but, you know, stressing that, that's always one of the questions that comes up. Well, why do we need this? And why do this? And what is the benefit? And what are the repercussions of not doing this? And there's a lot of probably inputs that could come from a group like this that could really populate that well.
we're already at critical mass. There is no extra left.
You already started over here when you started your graph.
Yeah.
We talked over here a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
You can explain your lines there, but that graph actually would have turned up about 30 years ago, almost straight up. And we know that from following our jail population, and the chief will be more accurate on these numbers, but we have had months when there's been over 300 arrests a month that we can't make. That's 300 people that didn't be put in jail that we just simply couldn't make because there wasn't room. And that also becomes a problem in communities when other people realize, the bad guys realize that where's the place to go where you're not going to get arrested, and what is that doing to your crime rates and your thefts and your vehicle thefts and everything else in your area when there's no accountability factor. And I think those numbers that he alluded to earlier, I think are very important because I think the judges and the system itself, the law enforcement officers, the city officers, the state officers, are also aware of this, that we have backed off as best we can down to nothing about not making those arrests. And now it makes it look like, well, maybe we don't need this, but you take a look at those numbers when we were able to outsource of what we really should be arresting and incarcerating. Those numbers are huge. And if you're not taking into custody 300 people a month, and we had, what, 268 one month, 286 another month in a row, I think those informational issues need to show that graph turning up tight to where it did in '85 when this opened, and they said, you know, within 4 years of the time this jail opened in 1984, 85, that it was well over the population of what was needed. And I can't, growing up here, I can't fathom that we would be so short-sighted as to do that again, to build a jail that within the first year or two is announced by one of the judges that it's overfull. And I think we need to look at that, but look at those actual numbers of what we would be putting in there, if we could.
And I think another conversation should also happen with the local hospitals. You know, some of those cases, they're brought in by the police directly to the emergency department for mental reasons, for, you know, attempting to hurt someone else or hurt themselves, attempting to jump off a bridge. They're then brought to the hospital, and then they sit in the emergency department because they have nowhere else to go. The state's full, the jails are full, the hospital itself is full, so there's nowhere else for them to go, but they sit in the emergency department for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, till they can have something done with them.
That's another stakeholder, but on that issue, on that issue of capacity, I thought Bill did a nice job in that discussion of what that trend should be. And then sort of softening that with what programs and diversion and other types of opportunities are there for, you know, non jail bed need, to eliminate that jail bed, and how can that be graphed, and as Bill said, it's part art, a little bit part science, and that's what we need to get to so we don't make that same mistake again.
Not just that, but access to the substance abuse programming and mental health programming inside the jail, which is pretty limited right now. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't exist. But if we had that kind of access and that kind of programming, I think you would find the crime rate falling. Right? If we could do more of the restorative justice that we just don't have while someone's incarcerated right now. They've got to successfully make a transition between walking out the jail and then getting themselves in a program. And that, 12-hour window is the most dangerous window for any of them.
Yeah. So an opportunity is to provide that access.
Yeah.
Right?
Any other kind of thoughts with regard to kind of goals or expectations for the project? So this is great, and these are a lot of really good ideas. What we do, and we're going to take all of these into consideration, but ultimately we also need to kind of know a little bit of a priority that's going to do. So this is going to be a chance for you after the last couple of hours of sitting down and kind of observing, for you to actually get up and be a little bit interactive. So what we actually have is some dots for you to be able to go and be able to rank. So what we need you to go and do is, we color code them so we can actually track by the two counties. So we're going to give, Mason County is going to have red and green. So red would be the three things that you view as being probably the lowest priority of all these ideas and goals that are up here. And then the green is going to be the three highest priority items for you that you'd like to ensure that are going to be part and incorporate into the project. The same for Grays Harbor. Blue is going to be your highest priority, and yellow would be your lowest priority three for you to be able to go there. So we want to be able to kind of give these out to you. It takes some time. Go review them and be able to put your dots up there over the next, let's give it about 10 minutes to kind of get through that. And then we'll kind of go into the last part of our discussion and wrap the meeting up. Okay. Commissioner, go first.
Dots, dude. I'm always the most insulted just that they ask me to do them. Yeah, we're missing one commissioner, so to be fair, maybe.
Not yet, I'm not sure yet. I'll think about it.
I have you as a tentative.
Okay.
So red is low, green is high.
Green is high.
Well, we all do. Oh, we did.
Yeah, each give them.
Oh, we're gonna give Commissioner Raines to travel.
Great. Do the same as all of you. Mason County.
Actually, about that too, because they brought the staff. I didn't realize that.
So these are Grays Harbor, Mason is green.
Well,
that's what I'm following the cheat.
Green is high, red is low.
Blue is green,
red is dots.
So are you doing one per page?
Well, I'm doing
Green is high, red is
I have
low.
two on one page. Exactly.
See, that's why I said I didn't want to do this back.
Red is stop, green is go. Green is go.
All right, there you go.
Red is low.
Yeah.
Where's just general
Lewis, my tour list.
Okay, wonderful, perfect. And I've got to do This will take advantage of it if they're interested. Great.
And then Frank had a concern about, I think each one of us.
On the what?
Yeah.
Yeah, entryway?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It is going to be a long
Berkshire.
Could be really long. And I was
Berkshire
trying to think about, either way, you're going to be dealing with traffic.
Yeah.
So it's either finding traffic. We start up there, and we drive in the morning, and you're kind of finding traffic. Gets to
So when we did the jail down there, we did.
or in the evening, you're going to be finding traffic. And it
Oh,
gets
yeah. It was over, it was underbuilt, it was back from the state provided funding, and they basically didn't add any more space, they just like updated the facilities, and so they funded these projects in the campus.
It's still gonna be a long day.
Yeah, and I thought about that, and I kind of looked at it, and I actually ran and got Google Maps, so we did different times for the trip, and in the end, you're doing it, you're going to get it in the morning,
or you're gonna hit it in the evening?
Oh, I know, yeah. Yeah, that building, yeah.
Which is, big time.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I know. Well, see, there was a sky bridge that went between the existing, because what they did is they added on, there's
that's what we
a four-story building.
recently, just courthouse
building
again, deal with the street.
Well, when Berkshire Phillips built on next to it, part of it, so they demolished the sky bridge and they built the building. Yeah, oh yeah, I remember that.
6:30.
You and I are right.
Rick is at 9. Dinner 10, 11, and then Albany, and driving back.
long, long.
I
term.
would
It is
be
very
for
hard
a
to
Access to development program.
I was
But yeah, I think it'll be really, a lot of the things that they have brought up.
Yeah,
What was observed, yeah, very good. He was, I think they're gonna see a lot of those.
Oh, is that right?
Single
Yeah, he was our
involved
project manager currently.
in different facilities, so I think.
Yeah, right.
And maybe getting those juices going, to just kind of think, oh, and have a quick record.
Yeah, he did, actually, he did a good job.
So I've been.
There's gotta be a way around
Yeah,
all that
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah,
I'll tell you the thing that I'm concerned about. is
Got hit with
there's
it
a
right out of the gate. On top of everything else that was doing.
Two public safety
So I've been.
taxes fake.
I've spent basically every day since May. Didn't help that I didn't have like my ministry last week. I mean, we knew she was terminal cancer for years in advance. It didn't come as a surprise, but it was still.
I hate to say it this way, but hopefully it was some relief.
It was.
There's some beauty in it, I get it.
It was. She was there at the end.
Going through files like civil files like.
And then that weird sense of guilt that goes along with that relief. That whole came out of.
We had a huge.
We got the new guy coming in October 10th. That will take a lot of stress.
You gotta fit in with your guys' dynamics.
He seems to. Yeah, he was our. I don't say this number two choice. Got to talk something else. She was for no other reason. She was by
Didn't that change?
It would have, yeah. But nice. But it would have been so nice that someone else saw that too and hired her.
What are we paying our starting?
So for a starting deputy one, we're just under 60,000. Yeah, 2s and 3s. So 2s do non-class A felonies and 3s do class A felonies. Starting for 2 is like 67, 68, or somewhere in there.
That's all they see.
Yeah.
Anything.
No, it's
It's not bachelor's.
Dude, what's the Juris Doctor?
So your whole thing is, how do you, but when we did that, when we
Well,
did this.
I stepped out a couple of times, so I haven't like. Well, yeah, so you had for a while.
We want this.
Well, and that's where I think the key
The chief
to
deputy
is
master,
this
and I
concept.
think he gave Tim a raise. Didn't talk about me.
No, you never have one. That's never
If
been.
there's more money available for my department, that's not what I want to do. I will never be the guy to, if I was living comfortably, I'm not gonna.
You remember your predecessor?
Well, that's, I am not my predecessor.
Remember that? I can remember that. We talked about a serious problem and she told me basically we don't care.
Yeah, well, I'm not the predecessor. I'm gonna do a job, I'm gonna do a job.
Matter of fact, we hardly hear squeaks. That's pretty impressive compared to where they came. I really had issues with it. When I came in, that was just amazing. Because I have respect for it, I suppose. It just was so bad back then. You know, I don't like your everyone saying it became really a serious situation. That TB.
Yeah, you know, I was only peripheral aware of what was going on, right?
When you come in and talk to us, I think what you say every time. That was usually.
Well, I don't know. You're my boss. I'm not gonna conflict it, you know?
Do you have any interest in
Great
it?
job.
So I got drawn for.
Yeah, if you're gonna put shine on it, 5, 10 of the process out of We're fine. My wife and I are fine. We don't matter.
What's your wife doing?
Yeah, she's actually a legal assistant from the Attorney General's office. Department of Natural Resources.
So she goes to Olympia to work?
Yeah, she runs the big pool.
My wife does.
Yes.
Could be. She's actually stepping back and going to do a lower CT scan because this way she'll have to do all the call and everything else. She'll give some more and also she's going to take 14 hours. But she's going to be happy.
All right. Just kind of to recap, thank you very much for kind of going through. The great thing that I kind of see here is that there's definitely a consistency. There's not a whole lot of ones that don't have both counties kind of responding similarly to them. Obviously we're kind of seeing quite a bit with regard to doing sustainable features just for sustainability's sake. But it needs to be really, I think that what we heard is it needs to be definitely appropriate. Access to mental health programs, so again, a big kind of driver as far as the yes goes. And then community outreach and kind of telling that story, but also being able to convey the message, but also being able to get public input is going to be a priority. Making them aware of the problem is going to be a key issue there. Training room spaces and a lot of staff directed spaces, the 50-year building, planning for a longevity of the facility and the systems. Safety, obviously big deal for inmates as well as on the staff side is going to be critical. And then, this was kind of interesting. I actually received, I think, the most yes or positive votes was regarding to capacity and room availability to be able to meet the needs in operations. So definitely a big driver is going to be really that program and those projections being something that's going to be accurate and something that would be defendable, and being able to convey it to the community is going to be a huge driver. So thank you very much for this. We're going to end up taking all of these, documenting them, and being able to use this as being able to kind of create a roadmap for decision making down the road throughout this entire process based off of the information that we received here. So then one last thing that we're going to ask you to do, so a lot of this was more kind of, for the goal setting was definitely much more concrete, really talking about kind of facility components or aspects of it. This next exercise, which is I want to be able to go through, is a little bit more on really visioning. What do you really see this facility potentially being? And it could be actually tied with a lot of these ideas that came up here. What we have provided and we have here is a whole bunch of different series of wide array of different images. Some of them actually are of different facilities where there are civic or correctional environments, and some are just more of, could be of plazas or of nature or of whatever. It's kind of a wider range of imagery. What we'd ask of you to be able to do is go through and pick out 3 or 4 images that you kind of see kind of convey your vision of the project, whether it is an image conveys to you, longevity, or of materiality, or of daylight, or of safety, or of security, whatever it might be, and pick out those 3 or 4 images that kind of resonate what you see the biggest, your vision of what this facility and the outcomes of this needs assessment should yield for you and your community. So we're going to ask you to just kind of come up there. We're trying to put them all up there so you just can kind of go through there and pick out some. We actually do also have a couple of some blank sheets. So if you're not seeing an image that conveys really what your priority is, you can actually write a word or a statement in here that kind of says really that's what my priority is, or that's what my vision of the project actually is. So you can feel free to do that as well. And then once we kind of get through this, we'll ask you to kind of describe those images so we actually understand exactly what your vision of the project actually is on more of an individual basis. Does that make sense? I did send out last week to everybody that if you happen to have any other example images that you can bring them yourself. Don't know if anybody actually did that, but you could do that as well. So we kind of will give everybody kind of a chance to kind of come up, walk around, look at the different images, and be able to grab any that kind of describe what you think, what you personally, your vision of the project actually would be. Does that make sense? All right. Thank you. We'll give about 10 minutes.
Are we just holding on to those?
Everyone is kind of done.
Did not need
I've met with her before. She's doing it
Bill, do you want to collect them all?
What?
Do you want to collect them all, or are you just clearing them?
I'm just clearing this space. We can do that after they're all done.
If I get access to
So you're going from
All right, be conscious of everybody's time. I think we'll kind of wrap this up. So what I'd like you to be able to do is, if you can kind of lay your your images out and describe why you picked those images, so we can kind of understand exactly what your point of view is for the vision, your vision of the outcomes of the study or of the project. So we can start here with the commissioner.
Well, the images I picked, they're very sterile, I guess. There's nothing fancy, and I don't think that we need anything fancy in our jails. What we need to make sure is that we, like for this one, there's safety separation.
Yep.
And I think that that's very important for our staff and for the people that are just coming in, let's say visitors or whatever. What do they call this? The entry.
The lobby or public waiting area.
Or if the inmates were.
Oh yeah.
Were
at the intake
down,
booking. Yeah.
The intake. There you go. So it's very clean. It's very easy. There's nothing that can be thrown around. It's very simple. This one I thought was very good because you've got, you can see what's going on.
Good line of sight.
Right.
Excellent.
Functionality, safety, longevity.
Perfect.
Whoa.
I like it.
Yeah, so selecting things of durable materials,
Practice last night.
He's almost got my 3.
a lot of safety for cells and those type of things, longevity. Get it? Great.
I'll follow him. I have to lead. Practical, efficient, and capacity.
Good.
That's it. Nothing fancy. That's even too fancy.
Yep.
Gray, plain, nothing.
Great. Commissioner?
Yeah, so kind of along those lines, but just, kind of clean lines, durable, safety, being able to keep an eye on everybody, kind of open, and then kind of pick this one just for staff space and work area and places for people to get treatment and all that kind of stuff.
Great.
So this one's for inmate programs. It's, I think it's important that we're going to have to provide inmate programs. I believe that if we do that, we'll help reduce recidivism, and that we can make a difference in people's lives by doing that. I think that, that's really important when we figure out how we're going to do that. That's pretty simple. That's just durable, it's long-lasting, it's plain, it's easy to work with, it's easy to clean, And then the last thing is this picture is a picture of a day room in a jail that's open, it's clean, it's there's no writing on the walls, it's light, you can see, and I think that it's probably quiet, because there's not a whole bunch of inmates running around out there, but it's controlled. And when we build a facility, I think that's part of the nature of running a jail is making sure that if we control it, not the inmates.
Yep.
And I believe that that's a kind of a reflection of that. It's clean. It's
perfect.
Yeah, so this one here is just a big hallway with kind of lines on each side, like Chief just talked about, more control. So you at least have space as well to get people going both ways, so you're not bumping into each other if you're crossing paths. This is a booking area where there's no holding cells right 3 feet away with people pounding and kicking and disrupting you, so you can't do your job. And this is just more efficiency, having like an admin area or an area out front, so you're not disrupting jail staff from doing their jobs.
Excellent. Yes.
So the same lines with Mason County Chief and Lieutenant is spacious hallways for movement with lines, and it looks like a correctional facility inside. This picture represents, for me, is we ask our staff to work in probably one of the crappiest working environments, is to have a staff side that has daylight to the outside with a nice place that they could say, this is where I work, without the public or seeing what's actually the actual condition that they work in. So I think that's important to our staff. And then two things not captured by this, but this is rain, water, is fire suppression systems that are tamper-proof. These make a big mess when the inmates inside pull, and it's only a misdemeanor or gross misdemeanor for them to pull the fire suppression system. Should be a felony. And no elevators. I couldn't find one that represent no elevators. No elevators in the jail.
And this is exactly why we have some obscure images that we showcase, is to be able to have those type of interpretations for fire suppression systems. So wonderful.
Curious, is elevators a choke point a security issue?
Breakdown. And multiple floors. We're not in downtown Chicago. We don't need a multiple floor facility.
Staff intensive.
Very
staff intensive. And those are the locations where if you're going to have an incident with an inmate on staff, that's going to be the location.
I didn't have photos, but I had it in my mind, which was basically the very large capacity area to house everyone. I like the cleanness of the jail. I like the idea of stained concrete again, because you're never gonna have to paint it. It doesn't chip away. Light areas. And then I was in a jail and I thought it was Kitsap County, but I'm not positive. And it was basically an open glass design. There was like a booking officer or a sergeant that was in the middle, and then there was glass, open windows, and then a half circle around him. So he could see 4 different pods of, I'm talking probably 50 guys each. So he was able to see 200 people. One person could see 200 people, and it was, I was thinking about that in the window.
Yeah, actually, I think one of the images that someone was grabbing was of Score Jail, which you can actually observe. Yeah, so that's at Skagit. So 326 inmates can be viewed from a single vantage point, and Score, it's roughly about that same size and quantities from a single location.
So efficient. Yes. And the movement would be so easy because everything is kind of on a hub. Everyone's coming to that center where you're not going from all the way over here and all the way over here. It's coming to a central hub, and everyone funnels in and out of the same direction.
So radial plan for flow and observation efficiency.
Yep.
Exactly. Wonderful.
So I went a little more abstract. But my perspective on this is narrow because of the public defender. I'm not going to be in trying to run the jail. But I really want to encourage us to remember that what we're dealing with here isn't just a people storage. It's a place where we have our most at-risk people in the community collected into one spot at one time. And that gives us an opportunity with the provision of the jail services and with getting that inmate programming in place. And so I've got 2 things. The first thing I chose was this wall, because if you look at it, this is an extraordinarily cheaply built wall. But someone has decided to just throw a little bit of color on there and make it a little bit artistic as a result. And so I've picked that because I think if you can just add a little bit of flair to the thing, instead of just the basic gray concrete that I've heard talked about here, you can improve a lot of the attitudes, a lot of the inmates, a lot of the time, and make the place a safer and better place.
Stained concrete is beautiful.
Yeah. No. That's what I'm saying. It's just something, not just plain gray.
Well, I'm not joking. It is.
Yeah.
Like the normative best practice I see up there is important. And the other one I chose, again, because it was a little more abstract, is I found this picture of a light, and it looks like an old lighthouse or something, but it's encased in bars. And so to me, that's that's the opportunity that we have, is we've got the opportunity to light something up even though it's behind bars.
Wonderful.
And that's why you're a good public defender.
Exactly. Very, very perceptive.
Yeah.
That was deep.
Exactly. Wonderful. Anyone else? Well, great. This is kind of wonderful. I think we definitely heard a lot of consistent terms with regard to that, with regard to longevity, practicality, durable, easy to maintain, safe and secure, but also with positive outcomes for the community portion of the community that this facility is ultimately going to be serving. So, thank you very much. I know this was a very, very long afternoon, but it was extremely valuable for us, and this is just the starting point, the jumping off point for this study that hopefully will have a very successful outcome with a lot of you guys' input here, 7-8 months from now. So thank you very much. Thank you. We're talking a lot.
Yep.
Thanks again. Yeah, so we've reached the end of our briefing, so we're adjourned. Thank you very much.